Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we're talking the 1988 Best Actress race at the Academy Awards, where Jodie Foster won for her performance in The Accused. But why did she beat fellow nominees Glenn Close, Melanie Griffith, Meryl Streep, and Sigourney Weaver? We'll explore all this and more today on And the Runner-Up Is. Hello and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host Kevin Jacobson, here to talk about the 61st year of Best Actress at the Oscars, which covered the films of 1988. We'll be discussing how Jodie Foster won, why the losers lost, and who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. And my guest today is another person on the show joining me for the very first time. She was a former arts and entertainment journalist at USA Today and is also one of the co-hosts of the podcast The Life of the Mind, a podcast about the Coen brothers. Welcome to the show, Barbara VanDenburgh.
Thank you so much for having me. I am very excited to talk about this year of Best Actress nominees and the winner.
Yes, much to talk about, honestly, with every single one of these, which we don't always have in this category, a lot to talk about. So grateful to have you here. But before we talk 1988, let's get to know you a little bit and talk about Best Actress as a category. So as I ask every guest, who would you say is your favorite Best Actress winner of all time?
So I didn't want to give this answer because I know it's probably a popular answer in I've listened to your podcast and one of the recent podcast guests listed this as their favorite. And so I was like, I don't want to be redundant. I want to be out of the box. And so literally I went on Wikipedia and looked through every single year of Best Actress nominees and winners. And I was like, I got to pick something interesting. But no, my answer is Olivia Colman. I mean, Olivia Colman winning for the favorite.
Yeah.
There's maybe some recency bias to that, but I think it was genuinely such a pleasant surprise because I find that in recent years, especially, the Best Actress and Actor winners are pretty much locked in place by the time you get to the Oscars. There's not a lot of surprise really. And so, Glenn Close, who we'll be talking about today at length, she lost for The Wife that year, but she had been winning the awards in the run up to that. And so I think we were all really expecting Glenn Close to get kind of her due and a makeup Oscar. And so just the surprise of Olivia Colman winning was delightful. She gave, I think, one of the most charming, just authentic to herself kind of speeches I've ever heard. And one of the things I do when I'm feeling kind of low and I need to pick me up is I'll watch some of my favorite Oscar speeches, and that's at the top of the list. And so it's an obvious answer. It's a repetitive answer, but it's my truth.
Yeah, we love that. Curious what your favorite line from the speech is. Mine is her last moment when she's like, Lady Gaga.
Well, yeah, that has to be it. I mean, that was the crowning moment of the speech. Lady Gaga. And then when she just does a raspberry noise with her, she does that with her tongue. And it's just there's no polish to it. There's not a false note in that speech. She's just being herself.
Yeah, and it's certainly not rehearsed,
Yeah.
She wasn't expecting it. So, yeah.
Yeah. So boring, obvious, but true.
No, well, a lot of people would agree with you. So on the flip side of that, of course, we have many Oscar losers that break our hearts over the years. So what would you say is your most heartbreaking Oscar loss in this category?
One of my favorite modern actresses, my girl, is Kate Winslet. And I had to watch her lose. I had to watch her lose many deserving nominations. She was nominated for Titanic, which she lost to Helen Hunt in As Good as It Gets. She was nominated for my favorite, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which she lost to Hilary Swank in $1 Million Baby. And none of these wins you can get especially mad about, right? It's just, I love Kate Winslet. And then she lost Little Children, which is another great one, to Helen Mirren and the Queen. And then she won for her worst movie, which is The Reader.
Yep.
So I was very sad to watch my girl Kate, lose 3 very deserving Oscar nominations in a row and then win for a movie I kind of couldn't stand.
Well, unfortunately, there is a pattern with that with the Oscars, as we know, where it's like,
There is
I can't
indeed.
believe they lost for these iconic roles, and then they won for, they won for The Reader. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are you going to do?
I would have preferred Revolutionary Road. I don't know about you. If she had won for that the same year.
I know. Yeah, I do. And I was surprised she didn't get nominated for that. She was directed by her then husband, Sam Mendes,
Yes.
in an adaptation of the Richard Yates novel. I liked it. I know a lot of people didn't like that movie. I thought it was actually quite a good adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
Great creepy performance by Michael Shannon in a supporting role.
Yes.
But yeah, I thought she was great in that as well. And yeah, unfortunately, The Reader, the Oscars can't resist a Nazi movie. I don't know. There was just like,
Yep.
Yeah, Holocaust drama. They even like parodied that on that Ricky Gervais show, Extras.
Yes.
They did a parody with Kate Winslet where she plays like a nun during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And they I think it was before she won for The Reader.
Yeah, it was like a few years before.
Happened. So it was,
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, she had their number.
That's a really, really good pick. I'm very excited to eventually get to the Kate Winslet era of this show, where I get to talk about her like every other episode, because like the 2000s were like her moment.
Oh yeah,
so
absolutely. I would love for her to have like a sort of. I mean, she's still phenomenal. I mean, she won an Emmy recently,
right.
For that show that she did on HBO, Mayor of Easttown,
Mm-hmm.
which was good. She was good in it. Yeah. But I would love to see her get sort of like a mid-late career, something juicy to work with that's not Avatar.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, excellent. Well, let's talk about this year at the Oscars. We're here to talk about the 61st Academy Awards. The nominees were Glenn Close in Dangerous Liaisons, Jodie Foster in The Accused, Melanie Griffith in Working Girl, Meryl Streep in A Cry in the Dark, and Sigourney Weaver in Gorillas in the Mist, with the winner being Jodie Foster. So before we break down these performances, Barbara, just curious what your overall thoughts were on this lineup.
I mean, it was an incredibly strong lineup. I mean, which is so not always the case. I think especially with the Best Actress nominees, and that's not to disparage actresses. That's a commentary on the Academy and the kind of roles that they tend to nominate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I just thought, like, a lot of these movies I've seen numerous times because I greatly enjoy them. They're memorable performances, and many of these movies have stood the test of time. So I thought it was an incredibly strong, interesting year. Obviously not a very diverse year because it never is.
Yeah.
But I mean, of the types of performances in here, you've got really dramatic performances, you've got kind of a villainous performance, you've got a rom-com performance. So it's a nice mix of tones and types of roles.
Yeah, it's a nice grab bag. I really like this lineup a lot. This is one of those lineups that is, full of stars. And, I think the roles that they're in feel very indicative of the time in which they were released. We have these, really interesting running theme, I think, of how women are sort of seen in society. We have multiple courtroom dramas where there's like this judgment that's cast on women. Obviously this period piece where there's a woman going against sort of like what's expected of her and obviously goes to like the absolute extreme in her manipulations. We have a classic 80s workplace comedy, and we have this biopic about a woman who really sort of charted her own path. So I think just on that level, there's a lot we could talk about with the themes going on here. So
yeah, what was kind of depressing too, the funny and kind of depressing was rewatching the courtroom dramas and realizing, you could make both of these movies in 2023 and not
much would
change much, and it would be incredibly relevant still.
Yeah, that's true. And in that sense, I think even though the scores of some of these movies are very distinctively 80s, you could very easily transport a lot of these to now and have very similar themes, unfortunately.
A little less hairspray, a little less synthesizer,
sure.
And just some updated sort of accoutrements, and you could make an incredibly current 2023 film out of some of these.
Yeah, But most importantly for myself and for listeners, this is where I finally get to talk at length about one of my absolute favorite performances of all time from my favorite actress, Glenn Close, in a role that many say she should have won for. So that's very exciting. And I'm also interested to break down how Jodie Foster sort of emerged here, having been a child star and winning over a lot of these actresses who are seen as, more serious and established at that time. So let's get into it, shall we?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, we are starting off with a bang here. Our first nominee is Glenn Close in Dangerous Liaisons. So yes, this is Glenn's 5th Oscar nomination already. She started off.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I know. She had 3 supporting nominations earlier in the 80s. She gets her first lead nomination for Fatal Attraction in 1987, and now here she is with another lead nomination and sadly another loss. And this is a pretty big loss, I would say. It's one that people, again, tend to look back on and maybe wish that she could have won for this one, considering how things would go in the future, but we'll talk a lot about that later. So Glenn really wanted this role ever since she first read the novel that it's based on. She was also expected to do the play version in 1985, but they went with an all-British cast. But as you would expect, that put her at the top of the list for this film adaptation, especially with all the clout she had, having all these Oscar nominations and being a star, and then doing Fatal Attraction, sort of proving she had that sense of darkness in her. So Dangerous Liaisons, it's set in pre-French Revolution era in Paris and centers on the Marquise de Merteuil, played by Glenn, a woman of high society who is hoping to get some revenge on her ex-lover, the Comte de Bastide, who ended their relationship. So she gets her own scheming ex-lover, Valmont, played by John Malkovich, to go after the Comte de Bastide's new fiancée, Cecile, played by Uma Thurman, and court her and sort of draw her into his web. Meanwhile, Valmont has his sights set on another woman, Marie de Tourvel, played by Michelle Pfeiffer, who doesn't take an interest in him at first, and he sees it as a challenge to court her as well. So Merteuil proposes that if he gets written proof of Tourvel's love of him, then she, Merteuil, will sleep with him. And a very dangerous game of lies and backstabs and all sorts of juicy stuff, cruelty, is set in motion from there. So let's talk Dangerous Liaisons. Glenn Close, this, again, a big one for me. I don't know if it is for you, but tell me your thoughts on the legendary Glenn and her performance here.
Well, when you asked me about what my most heartbreaking Best Actress Oscar loss was, and I went on a thing about Kate Winslet, it was also to avoid spoilers for this episode.
Yeah.
And that spoiler is the other one is Glenn Close in Dangerous Liaisons.
Fair enough.
Which is my favorite role of hers. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. I adore her in this. I think she's scarier in this than she was in Fatal Attraction. She plays, gosh, I don't even know where to start. I don't even know where to start with Dangerous Liaisons. She plays a truly evil woman in this, right? Like she is destroying lives for sport. With John Malkovich's character, they're both in this sort of weird, demented flirtation with one another, and they're destroying other people's lives for sport as a way of courting one another in a strange way, and then it turns into something else along the way, and it kind of gets away from them. And she's this just this truly despicable kind of woman, and yet she is so entertaining and so funny, and you're not necessarily, well, you're kind of rooting for. I don't know. I was kind of rooting for her, which maybe says something about me.
Me too.
But she's able, and maybe it's too soon to skip to the ending, but she's able to elicit such sympathy and sadness without dialogue in the last few minutes of this film, which is like, I think some of the best minutes ever put to film are the last few minutes of this film, and just an acting tour de force when her plans succeed too well. Yeah. When it gets out of her control and her plan succeeds too well, and she destroys her own life in the process, and you see the mask come off, the mask that she's been wearing this entire film literally come off. It's phenomenal. Nothing I think this year or most years compares to this performance.
Yes. Well, glad to have you on this episode because I totally agree. Yeah, I mean, like, this is one of my favorite performances of all time. This is one of those performances that made me, when I was younger, as a fan of Glenn Close, turned me into like a lifelong fan.
Yeah.
The level of just wickedness and how she delights in playing these psychological mind games on people. There's just something oddly satisfying about it. And for
Mm-hmm.
as conniving as she is and how much she completely ruins people's lives and seems to delight in it, there is that thing in the back of your mind that is like morbidly curious to see if she can get away with it, you know? And I think she draws you in as a viewer because Glenn plays her with so much intelligence ultimately.
Yeah,
You know?
she's so smart, and she's so I mean, she's gorgeous, of course,
Yeah.
and incredibly intelligent, very witty, very sharp, and you kind of end up rooting for her a little bit, even though you know she's bad, because everybody around her is a little bit dull, a little bit naive,
Yeah.
a little bit silly, and especially in this era where everybody's powdered and wearing wigs and playing these elaborate social games, and she cuts through all of it and is the smartest person in any given room. And so, yeah, you get up sort of ensorcelled by her a bit, even though, you know, morally you know better. But it is fun to watch her like destroy these unserious lives, you know?
Yes, exactly. Because also, like, this is a woman, as she says, who knew from an early age that the rules that are put in place for her in society were unfair and sexist, and she knew she was capable of more than that. And so she's like using her intelligence and her observations about human behavior basically as her weapon, you know? And I think
Yeah.
Glenn, in her physicality, her very just like comfortable posture, her smugness when she's sort of finding it amusing how much smarter she is than everyone else, she just exudes so much confidence and skill that you do want to see what she's capable of, because like it's such an like an elaborate way of wielding your power and to get away with it without being blamed yourself, without people suspecting you at all. And I think that's really the crux of her performance. But then you see in those little moments how she lets some things slip, and you see
Mm-hmm.
her kind of hurting deep down. I think that's how I analyze it. And it makes you feel that twinge of sympathy for how she knows, like, eventually that she has let things go too far. But it's like she's a little too
Yeah.
prideful to really own up to it in a way. So,
Oh, definitely. And then she gets vulnerable, but in ways that don't outwardly appear vulnerable. Like she has this great conversation with Uma Thurman. Uma Thurman's character, who's been ravaged sort of by Valmont, comes to Glenn Close, and I don't know everybody's names. I'm sorry,
it's
they're all
fine. The Marquis de
French and old,
Merteuil.
and
Yeah.
I.
Yeah. We can just call
But
her Glenn.
Uma Thurman comes to Glenn Close, and she's, you know, crying about Valmont and how he's, you know, sort of ravaged her. She was you know, a virgin who grew up in a convent, and she's, you know, engaged to be married to a man who prizes her virginity. And Glenn Close gives her, I mean, it's self-serving because she's playing a game, but she gives her this speech about, you know, women have very few powers, and if you play your cards right, you can have sex with as many or as few men as you want, and it's one of the few joys that you get in life is this body of yours and how you use it and what you do with it and how you kind of can control men with it, because this is one of the few tools that you have as a woman.
Yeah.
And you know, it's a self-serving speech because she's manipulating Uma Thurman's character, but there's also a bit of truth. There's truth under the surface to that, and you can tell that that is applied to how she's lived her life. And so I mean, I think one of the brilliant things about Glenn Close's performance is that there are so many moments like that where little bits of truth are hidden under the surface of this game, and she's not doing these big like dramatic reveals or anything like that. It's all layered.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, speaking to that, Glenn also has a quote from around when this was coming out, talking about just the motivations of her character and finding her way into it. And she said, from her point of view, she's totally justified in what she does. She's cursed by this brilliant intelligence in an age where women were relegated to the salon and the boudoir. She's trying to get back at that situation and become a virtuoso player of these sexual games, only to find that they get out of hand. And I noticed that she actually has kind of a similar justification for Alex Forrest in Fatal Attraction, not in terms of like reveling in the scheming and the cruelty, but just in feeling justified, her characters, by taking these very drastic actions, because she is living in a society that just favors men, not unlike in Fatal Attraction, like contemporary 80s New York. the dynamics are not all that dissimilar from, pre-revolution France here.
Well, again, we talked at the beginning about being able to make some of these films in modern day and not a lot would change. I mean, I know that this is a period piece and it's set in, whatever century France, and it's very, very different, but also it's kind of the same because you can make something like Fatal Attraction that has these similar like undertones and through lines where, a woman who doesn't have as much power in a given social situation as a man kind of snaps and manipulates under that pressure. And so it's interesting how those two roles echo with one another.
Yeah.
Given how different they are.
Right. One line that I love is when Valmont says, like, I thought betrayal was like your favorite word. And her response is perfect when she says cruelty. I always think that has a nobler ring to it. And I think like she's right. Like there's something much more intoxicating for her about cruelty, like having that kind of power over people and sort of playing God. And I think because the film itself is, you could say, a little bit like heightened and tawdry and all that stuff, she really leans into her sort of reveling in the wickedness of it. And I think is very effective just in her speaking in that quiet but also like refined tone in the beginning especially. And it creates this effect of her just being like this assassin. It's like everything she says down to the letter has a purpose.
Yeah, and every like micro action too. Like I love her and John Malkovich in this together. Like the way that they play off one another is just they're both vibrating on the same wavelength. Yeah. They're above and beyond everybody else in the film, and that's not to criticize everybody else in the film. It's just they are on another level. And down to like just the micro actions within their interactions. There was one scene I watched a couple of times where John Malkovich is trying to sort of entice her possibly into like a sexual dalliance. He's trying to seduce her, and she's playing him still, and she turns her face ever so slightly as he leans in for a kiss, and you can tell he's thinking about maybe taking the kiss by force, but it's not as good. He wants her to give it to her. It's just like they're communicating all of these subtexts without ever saying a word about it. It's just in these like micro interactions with their bodies and their facial expressions, and it's just chef's kiss.
Yeah, I know people like to rag on John Malkovich here, thinking that he's...
Oh no, I think he's great.
I do too. Like at first, when I first saw it, I'm like, this man is overacting like crazy, but just like as I've evolved, like there's something about his energy that is so perfectly matched with hers that like I can't
his character. It's not that he's overacting. I think it's that his character is overacting. Yes. Because his character is also playing. It's not that John Malkovich is overacting as Valmont. It's that Valmont is overacting as Valmont. He's right. Playing a role within this heightened society. And so he's necessarily heightened in response. And now in the scenes with just him and Glenn Close, he's not doing that.
Right.
He's much more subtle. He's much more subdued. He's matching her energy in private. It's only with these other fools that he's acting like that. So I think it's a very intentional choice. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. Another scene, of course, that Glenn is so excellent in is when she talks of like inventing herself as this powerful person. Listen, observe, like not to what people are saying, but whatever it was they were trying to hide, and she got by sticking a fork into the back of her hand. She became a virtuoso of deceit. There's something about this monologue that I feel like another actress could really sort of ham it up and maybe not make the lines itself actually feel real. But like there's something about the way she very patiently is doling out this speech that is just delicious, and it makes you understand where this, like how she became who she is now, which is this anger deep down.
And we know that Glenn is an actress who can ham it up. I mean, she played Cruella de Vil, so she's very capable of hamming it up and chewing scenery. And so that the fact that she does it in this role, that she plays it as measured as she does, is such a choice, such an artistic decision that she's made that, I mean, really makes this movie as special as it is.
Right. And even in that monologue and her just laying it all out there, I love how she also has a little bit of that bemused expression. Like she really does have those kind of narcissistic qualities, I guess, of like a sociopath who's like bragging about how she got away with it. you know?
I love this movie. I could talk about this movie for 3 hours.
I know. Eventually we
So
have to move
much.
on, but, you know.
I know.
So I think also one of the better components of her performance is just how she weaponizes her eyes. Like she's always
Mm-hmm.
looking around at the opera to see who's with who, what information she
Yep.
can gain from these little social gatherings. And it's like she doesn't really take pleasure in like the opera itself. Like that is of no interest to her or pretty much any other part of her life other than tending to her little grudges. But it's
Yeah.
like those eyes.
Playing playing and winning these social games and the way, and she gathers, her weapons to do this through observation, right? It's the
Yeah.
power of observation and seeing who's playing who and who can undermine whom and how she can manipulate people to do what she wants to foil their plans. And it's just she's operating just on a totally different like intellectual and social level than anybody else, and yet
Yeah.
she doesn't have the freedom of somebody like John Malkovich who can like run around and perform all these schemes and do all these things and
Right.
be a heel in public, and everybody's just like, oh well, that's just Belmont. Like she couldn't do that.
Exactly. Right. And that is why you feel that sympathy with her ultimately.
Yeah.
But no, it's just the way she kind of like narrows her eyes without it feeling too like mustache twirling, maniacal, two-dimensional villain, I think is a credit to her.
Well, and it's what makes it so much more, the ending so much more power. I
Yeah.
adore the ending. It's
Yeah,
what
yeah.
makes it so powerful is that you've not seen any of that sort of like swing for the fences, dramatic performance. She's so subdued. You called her an assassin at one point, and very much it feels like a quiet assassin who's assessing everything and playing an angle at every turn. And then at the end, all that falls away. And then I think at the end we get to see her authentic self and her authentic feelings, and she has incredible rage and incredible sadness and incredible shame all kind of collide in this emotionally devastating scene, and that scene hits so hard, I think, because of how reserved she is for the rest of the movie.
Yeah, exactly. And also another fantastic scene of a little bit of that rage is her argument with Valmont, because it's like two people who are very capable of real ugliness turned against each other, and things have escalated by this point and just like hurting each other despite probably loving each other deep down, especially when he makes it clear that he still wants to try to get with Torvel again, Michelle Pfeiffer's character, and this hurts Glenn, and so she like refuses to hold up her end of the bargain and refuses to sleep with him, and naturally he responds by yelling at her, and her response when she finally explodes, where she is like, one of the reasons that I never remarried, despite a quite bewildering range of offers, was the determination never again to be ordered around. And just like the rage that she expresses in that line, I think is genuinely frightening.
It's frightening, but there's something like so sad about it, because clearly they do. I mean, as monstrous as they both kind of are, I think they're sort of twisted into their monstrousness because they love each other, question mark.
Yes.
In their own kind of ways, but because of who they are and how they're wired, they are unable to make that work or manifest that. Like, her, from her perspective, she doesn't want another man to have that kind of power over her ever again. But clearly she harbors like deep affection for him. There's the scene where he tells her that, he's deflowered Uma Thurman and maybe she's pregnant now. She's like 2 weeks late with her period. And Glenn Close has this reaction of, oh, I didn't want that. Like she's kind of sad, but she has to pretend not to be sad. But again, it's in that great Glenn Close kind of way where she's not completely showing her hand. You have to read the subtext of her body language and how she reacts to the news that Uma Thurman's period is late, and just the complete inability to be honest and on the level with each other at any point kind of leads them to where they end up. And even though they're both evil, it's weirdly tragic.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, I love the scene where he asks if like this is a declaration of war between them, and we get that incredible close-up where she says, all right, war. Which again, she just revels in those kind of delicious lines like that.
Oh yeah, just iconic. She's just iconic.
Yeah. And yes, obviously things escalate between them, where she tells Danceny, Keanu Reeves about Valmont sleeping with Cecile, and he challenges him to a duel, and then Valmont dies, but then not before setting in motion this plot to spill all of, Murtai's dirty secrets. And yeah, that incredible ending where she's, screaming in pain in her house and then going to the opera, and it's like all of her power is lost. Her society has completely turned against her and they boo her. Just like the humiliation on her face, I think, is so palpable. Her realizing just how far she went and now she has nothing left. And yeah, I don't want to say that you like fully sympathize with her, but it is very effective in sort of watching this woman suffer such a public humiliation when you know that this is like all she has at this point is like her reputation. And then she goes back to her house, and yeah, that incredible close up of her taking off her makeup and looking
just
truly
brilliant.
Dead inside. It's all the life being sucked out of her in that final scene, and she's just like a shell of a person that she was before. And more or less because of her own actions, not entirely, but like she has been hoisted by her own petard, as it were.
Right.
So,
but also I feel like it's what I love about the movie is it doesn't feel like the movie is delighting in taking her down a peg.
Right.
Like the movie feels like, not that it's on her side, but the movie feels like it's trying to really understand her. And with that understanding comes some sympathy. Right. So the movie isn't delighting in her ruin at the end. It's not like you as a viewer are like, haha, right. The bitch lost or whatever.
Which is a little bit like the Fatal Attraction ending, if I'm being honest.
No, it very much is like the Fatal Attraction ending. You were supposed to walk away from that movie thinking, haha, women be crazy. And I'm not going to go so far as, well, I don't know. I haven't seen Fatal Attraction in a hot minute. I don't know if it's misogynistic necessarily, but I remember feeling gross about it. It's been a while, but I remember feeling gross about it. And that the takeaway was supposed to be like, he yanked this woman's chain until the chain broke. And then you were supposed to sit in judgment of Glenn Close at the end and be like, wow, women are nuts. And this movie is very much not doing that. I feel like Dangerous Liaisons is very much a movie, at least in some sympathy with Glenn Close. And you were supposed to feel a little bit of devastation for her at the end.
Yes, exactly. And I think it just helps that, honestly, of the 5 here, I think this is easily the best written film here.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of just really delving into these characters and giving them sort of the proper ending, like, and having us linger on that shot, I think, for as long as we do, is a testament to that. And that face, again, is something I will truly never forget. I think it's the finest moment of her career, honestly. So
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. And I think it's the best film, too, because it's the one that, personally, I've been driven to watch the most. I've seen Dangerous Liaisons more times than I've seen any of these other films.
Same.
And it's also the movie that I had to watch multiple times to really understand. Like, I don't think I fully understood Dangerous Liaisons the first time I watched it. I knew I liked it, but I was like, this movie is beguiling and interesting and operating in layers, and I had to watch it multiple times to unpack those layers. And I don't think I've had that experience with any of the other movies on this list. They're all pretty straightforward. So I think there's a kind of cinematic and literary brilliance to Dangerous Liaisons that's missing in the others.
Yes. Just hearing you say that made me realize, like, if I'm in like 17th century France and I'm having to deal with Glenn Close as this manipulative woman, I would absolutely be manipulated by her.
I would lose completely.
I would be under her spell and just be like, whatever you want. I would be like Keanu Reeves, and like just like in the bed being like, hi, welcome back. Did you have fun with your manipulations? Yeah. Anyway.
To be Keanu Reeves in the bed, if only.
Yeah. Very interesting performance from Keanu here.
Yeah. It's better than him in Dracula.
Sure.
I think it kind of works. I think it kind of works here a little bit. Like maybe not intentionally, but it kind of works.
Yeah, the naivete, I think.
Yeah.
But anyway, Glenn Close, Dangerous Liaisons. I cannot say enough about this performance. It is like one of those performances that I've been leading up to finally being able to break this down. So glad you could pretty much agree with me on this, that it's just marvelous work.
So it's I think among the best actress nominees of all time, and it hurts my heart that she didn't win.
Yeah. Oh, and one other thing is that like watching it again, I feel like she does have such impact, but it is worth noting that like she doesn't have a lot of screen time, especially compared to some of the others. Yeah. Like
I was kind of surprised.
Yeah.
I was kind of surprised watching it this time specifically for this podcast and thinking of it through the best actress lens. Like she would disappear from the film for like long stretches of time. It would be the John Malkovich show for quite a while, and then she would pop back in. But every time she's on screen, she commands the screen, which I think is what ultimately matters. I mean, you think of somebody like Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs. He's only in that movie for 17 minutes. And I don't think anybody really questions whether or not he deserved a Best Actor nomination and win. And I think similarly here, you shouldn't question whether or not Glenn Close deserves a Best Actress nomination.
Yeah. I was literally going to make the same comparison. This feels like a precursor to the Anthony Hopkins discussion. So, yeah, the Marquis de Merteuil, Hannibal Lecter, same thing. All right. Anything else before we move on to a very different movie?
No, or I just won't stop.
Yeah,
if we keep talking, I won't stop.
Yeah, this will be 4 hours. Anyway, okay. Let's move on to Melanie Griffith in Working Girl. So this is, of course, Melanie Griffith's one and only Oscar nomination. Unfortunately, after Working Girl, she became a bit of a mainstay at the Razzies, who just kept nominating her over and over again, and she was never quite able to get to this career high of Working Girl again, I would argue. But also, pretty great movie to have as your career high. So to introduce Melanie, because we haven't talked about her before, she has a very fascinating background. She is, of course, the daughter of Tippi Hedren, who was famous for her collaborations with Alfred Hitchcock. So she grew up in Hollywood. She went into modeling at an early age, and she had her big film debut with the movie Night Moves in 1975. She played a lot of roles that emphasized her beauty, her body, what they call nymphette roles, and she had her major acting breakthrough of sorts with the movie Body Double, which earned her a few notices, including a Golden Globe nomination, and then she had her first proper starring role in Jonathan Demme's Something Wild in 1986, which she got another Golden Globe nomination, and then Mike Nichols here cast her in Working Girl, and he really believed that she was the right person for the part, even threatening to quit the project if she wasn't cast. And it was a bit tumultuous behind the scenes during filming because Melanie had been struggling with addictions to drugs and alcohol. There was an incident where she came to the set high on cocaine, and Mike shut the production down for a day and made her pay the cost of losing the day, which was $80,000. And it was a real humbling experience for her that really got her to focus for the rest of the shoot. And eventually she gets this Oscar nomination. So quite an interesting journey for her. But having said that, Working Girl is about this working class woman, Tess McGill, played by Melanie, who quits her corporate job after not being taken seriously, and she joins another company working as the new secretary of a woman named Catherine, played by Sigourney Weaver. More on Sigourney later. And Sigourney's character seems to have good intentions at first, but ends up stealing Tess's idea for a merger that would be profitable for the company. And after Catherine gets in a skiing accident, Tess takes over and decides to go about making this merger happen for herself and gets involved with Jack Traynor, played by Harrison Ford, who helps her to pitch this idea, and they also fall in love. And Catherine is mortified when she hears about this, and it's made all the more complicated because Jack was previously involved with Catherine. Hijinks ensue. So let's talk Melanie Griffith and Working Girl. This is certainly, again, one of those defining 80s movies, so I'm curious your thoughts on Working Girl, on Melanie Griffith, and her performance here.
Well, I realized watching it this time through that it's essentially Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead for grown-ups. Like it's the same kind of plot.
Sure.
Like, I don't know if you've seen Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead recently, but it's still the same kind of thing where girl with career ambitions, but from sort of like a low social standing, schemes her way into a corporate position she shouldn't technically have. And then finds love and success through these, kind of scheming delightfully scheming back channels. This is the opposite of this kind of scheming is the opposite of the kind of scheming we just talked about in Dangerous Liaisons. It's pretty charming and pretty harmless. I mean, I think Melanie Griffith, first of all, I find it a very charming movie, even if I find its corporate aspirations kind of depressing, like that her big dream is to have a corporate job where she facilitates mergers and is one of a million people working in downtown Manhattan in a cubicle. Or I
Yeah.
just in 2023 eyes, it was like, oh, this is a sad dream.
Yeah.
But I think she's doing a hard task well. I think it's hard to play a smart girl that people mistake for dumb, right?
Yeah.
She is somebody who has intelligence, both like social intelligence and professional intelligence, but she is hampered by class and social standing. And, you know, when she starts her new job with Catherine, her boss, played by Sigourney Weaver, her boss is immediately like, "Hey, tone down the jewelry," because it's sort of like a class distinction, right? Like she's wearing this loud metallic jewelry. She's got lots of it all over, and her boss is immediately like, "You need to tone down the jewelry," because it signifies kind of like a lower class. So she's somebody who has this, you know, intelligence and is able to succeed in these settings, but hasn't been given the chance because of her background. But she also plays to these people like she's a little bit dumb, like she's too naive. And I think that's like a sophisticated and hard balance to strike, to be both intelligent seeming, but also somebody that other people can mistake for kind of dumb, for kind of flaky and flighty. And I think she does that really well.
Yeah. For me, like, obviously this is a very, very fun movie to rewatch and a fascinating product of its time, commenting like very directly on corporate culture in the 80s, the effects of Reagan, you know, women in the workplace. It's very much like the exemplar of like a particular place and time, for better and for worse, as you've already kind of noted. And I can't say that I'm like a fan of Melanie Griffith necessarily, not that I dislike her at all. I can't say that I've seen a lot of her work, to be honest, but she's not necessarily one of my faves compared to like the other four here, at least.
Well, I think she's the least interesting person in the movie, which is kind of a problem.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
it doesn't make the movie not work, but in terms of looking at Best Actress nominees, she's not even the most interesting character in her own movie.
Yeah.
Like, Harrison Ford is just a dreamboat romantic leading man.
Yes.
He's just so charming and charismatic. Joan Cusack almost runs away with the entire movie in this like total scene stealer in this minor role. Alec Baldwin is very entertaining. Sigourney Weaver, I think, of all of the people in this movie, like maybe Sigourney Weaver should have won her Oscar nomination for this. So
yeah.
I don't have any like overt criticisms of Melanie Griffith in this role, and maybe part of it's just the fault of the writing, but I think she's the least interesting character in the movie.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think, you know, this is obviously her big moment where everything sort of converged for Melanie in her career, and I think she does make for a solid, like, plucky heroine, even if I don't fully love the performance. And I sort of do think I agree with, like, you know, Sigourney Weaver, Harrison Ford, Joan Cusack, all of them I think are so locked into the comedic elements of the film, especially, and really seem to jibe well with Mike Nichols' direction. And Melanie is obviously tasked with the dramatic arc of the film, so like it's a different energy. But I do honestly think that this is a case of the character of Tess being a little more compelling than Melanie in her performance of Tess. And it's hard to make that distinction sometimes, but I do think, you know, she does have a great, like, radiant energy that she brings to it that makes it easy to root for her. And she makes her just a really fun, sort of scrappy underdog, like rags to riches sort of thing. And then there's also an uneasiness at times that I was just personally just wondering, like, is this just Melanie not being super comfortable in this role? But I do want to give her credit because I do think sometimes that uncomfortable quality is like the awkwardness of her line deliveries at times and her body language is somewhat intentional with just showing how out of place she is in this corporate world. And is like, you know, she's just the girl from Staten Island who's now hobnobbing with the big boys who come from rich families. But then there's other moments where she seems, I hate to say it, but a little bit vacant. Like she's just kind of saying what's in the script but not really living it authentically.
But I don't know how much of that is Melanie Griffith and how much of that is the script.
Yeah, it's
Like
hard to.
the other roles you can get kind of like goofy with. Like Sigourney Weaver almost feels like she's in a different film, like with the skiing accident, and she's got her leg up and she's bursting in on like boardroom meetings, and she's extra, right?
Yeah.
Joan Cusack is extra. Even Harrison Ford is a little bit like goofball
Mm-hmm.
in this film. And Melanie Griffith, again, like you noted that she's sort of she is the dramatic arc of the movie. She is, the heart and the dramatic art of the film. She's playing, her role is different, right? And she's got to be somebody that we empathize with. She's played straight in a way that the other characters aren't. I don't know how much of that is Melanie, and I don't know how much of that is the writing and direction.
Yeah. Again, it's hard to tell at times. But from the first few scenes, even before she gets the new job, like, you can definitely get the impression that this is this young secretary who isn't being taken seriously. She has a bit of that like baby doll Marilyn Monroe voice, and she has the big blonde hair and is reflecting a certain image, again, within this business world of, it feels like it's not too far removed from like Mad Men in terms of how she's treated, but you see this sort of eagerness in wanting to improve her stature in life, and that she is very capable if only she was treated equally. I just think there are, again, some missed opportunities. Like, even when she's talking with like Olympia Dukakis, who shows up for like one scene as this personnel director, I should say, and she's like desperate for a new job, but she doesn't really give that kind of desperation for me in her performance. Like, it is a little remote for me. So again, like, I'm very interested in the character of Tess as she is, evolving throughout the film. I just wonder if like this is someone who's been bandied about as a possible like who could have done this role, but like Meg Ryan, could do something like this, maybe with a little punchier attitude.
I can see that. I guess what I don't understand I think that this is probably a writing failure of the film is I don't understand why Tess wants this like success in business so badly, why she wants that office job beyond just it's a status symbol and it means I've done something, right? Like, I don't understand. And it's such like a dull transactional, corporate environment. It's not like they're creating something, like they're making something of value for society or anything like that. It's just mergers and acquisitions and how the numbers add up on a piece of paper. Like, there's nothing, if they're not making anything. It's like, and don't tell mom the babysitter's dead, not to keep bringing it back to that, but Christina Applegate in that movie is like wants to be a fashion designer, and so she's trying to create, like, she has a vision and she's trying to create fashion, and there's a heart to that, because the reason she wants to succeed in this business environment is so that she can make her art, right? And so there's not an equivalent of that in Working Girl. Like, I don't know why Tess wants what she wants beyond it is a status symbol of success, and it will mean that she has made it. And there's just not I think that's a writing failure, that there's not I think somebody like Meg Ryan would have been pluckier and kind of better in the role and popped off the screen more, but also it's a writing failure because I don't know why what she wants, and I don't really care if she succeeds in business. I don't care that much.
Yeah, that's a very, very good take. I think after Catherine has had her skiing accident and, she tells Tess to move in and like house sit for her, you see her like trying on all of Catherine's clothes and doing all these things, almost like mimicking her in this very like All About Eve sort of way almost.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I feel like, oh, maybe this is just like for status for Tess. That's what it's all about. She just wants to be that person. But I agree that doesn't really go deeper than that.
And I know we're not supposed to be on Catherine's side, but it is kind of a lot of a violation to take her job, take her ex-boyfriend, kind of boyfriend still. I don't think they've officially broken up.
Yeah.
To take her job, to take her boyfriend, and then to go into her closet and try on all of her clothes. Like, I think Catherine's justified in wigging out when she gets back.
Yeah, that's a very, very solid point. But I also do think speaking to her stuff with Catherine, I think she is good in the scene where Catherine's kind of like giving her this bullshit motivational pep talk. And like after she tells her that the mergers and acquisitions place wouldn't be interested in Tess's idea, and Tess is kind of heartbroken, but I feel like there is more to it than that. Like there's this feeling that, yeah, maybe I'll get it on the next one. But also like something about Catherine's quickness with just how quickly she dismisses Tess's idea. I think you see in Melanie's face the way she kind of looks at her a little suspiciously, that indicates that, oh, this whole dream of like girl power partnership is dead, essentially, or dying, or Catherine is kind of full of shit, essentially, when she's trying to say these things. I do think, I don't know if that's just because I've watched the film before and I knew where this is all going, but I do think Melanie does lay the tracks a little well of like being like, okay, like being a little like, oh, I thought you were going to be on my side.
Yeah. And I feel, I mean, I don't know, like to bring this back to Melanie Griffith, she's part of this like dynasty, this acting dynasty, right? And I feel kind of, I don't need to feel sorry for Melanie Griffith. Like she doesn't need anybody's sympathy.
Yeah.
Her life is totally fine. But like from a legacy perspective, to be sandwiched on either side by Tippi Hedren and Dakota Johnson in this acting dynasty has to be kind of rough. Like to have your mother be in like some iconic roles and to have your daughter already be in some like really cool roles, and then, you know, for the height of your career to be body double and working girl and then not much after is kind of rough from a legacy standpoint.
Yeah, I know. Well, some actresses would be very happy if they got only one Oscar nomination. So like, you know.
Absolutely. They're all doing so much better than me and than I will ever do. So
there you go.
I don't mean to be condescending and say I have sympathy for Melanie Griffith. She certainly doesn't need it. She's had, you know, a more successful career than 99.9% of actresses. But it would have been nice to see her sort of expand on the success of Working Girl more than she was able to.
Yeah. One line that we have to talk about is after she meets Jack and he makes this kind of comment at the party about her being like a different type of person that he usually meets at these parties. And she says, I have a head for business and a bod for sin. Is there anything wrong with that?
I mean, a ludicrous line.
Yes.
A ludicrous line that you can't say seriously, which I think is part of the problem of the movie.
Yeah, it's like the line delivery even is so odd for me because it seems like she's sort of kidding, like wink wink, but it's also kind of deadpan at the same time.
Oh, it is. Yes, it's too well. And I think, again, I mean, I think maybe casting Melanie Griffith in this role in this kind of way, like, you know, she had been somebody who was cast because of how she looked in a lot of movies, right? It was like she was a beautiful woman. She does have a beautiful body, and she had been cast in these sort of like sexy roles that kind of highlighted that. And this movie was different, right? Like here she's got a 3-dimensional character and she's clothed for most of it, but they still have these lines in there like that where it sort of draws back to those earlier performances where it's like, oh no, but Melanie Griffith is hot, you know? And it's like, okay, well, sure. I don't know.
Yeah.
I would have liked to see kind of like a mousy, awkward girl in this role, maybe more than Melanie Griffith, you know?
Yeah, that's fair. I think the whole segment after she basically blacks out because she took too much Valium and mixed it with drinks, and she fears that she slept with Jack, Harrison Ford, but he actually ends up taking care of her. All that stuff I think is some nice kind of screwball energy. And of course she has this mortifying moment at the meeting when she realizes, oh, this is the guy that I was trying to get in touch with at the party, and he didn't really tell me who he was. And she doesn't really like stumble through the meeting, but she's clearly thrown off in her big pitch and she's feeling humiliated. But I do just enjoy kind of seeing her winging it. Like it's very much a fake it till you make it kind of thing that she locks into. And just all her hijinks with Joan Cusack's character, Sin. Again, Joan Cusack, incredible scene stealer. I do think their friendship feels very genuine. And kind of as a side note, that is why it's a little disappointing over time that she does distance herself from Sin after a while. But I also think it's pretty realistic with, like, you know, ambitious people. And what's fascinating about the film and the way Melanie is playing this is that Tess may not be conscious of how being in this corporate world and wanting to be a big player in it does mean that certain relationships do go by the wayside, and you have to make difficult choices that might maybe compromise your integrity at times. And, like, you know, by the end, she's calling Sin at her office and she's happy for her. I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but I think there is a parallel you can draw, kind of speaking to what maybe you were saying earlier, between Tess thinking that what she's doing is just she's getting ahead and it's the right way of doing business and how she would defend her actions. And then we have Catherine, who is also making certain choices that are manipulative and not entirely ethical, and she's basically vilified here as the wrong kind of woman in business, you know. And certainly what Catherine did to Tess seems like worse in the long run than what Tess does to Catherine after that. But is it just like that feeling of revenge that makes us kind of feel compelled to, like, justify what Tess is doing? That's my question.
I mean, I feel a kind of sympathy. I know you're not supposed to. I know the movie doesn't want you to because of the way that it presents her, but I do feel a kind of sympathy for Catherine because, you know, there's no easy way in this era, I mean, in the 80s, to be a high-powered woman in business, right? There's no easy way to do that. There's not a lot of precedent for it. There aren't a lot of women in this position. And I think what Catherine is trying to do is to protect her coveted position in this cutthroat, misogynistic, male-dominated world. I mean, there are no other women at the table, you know, for this merger and acquisition meeting. There's no other women there. It's all, you know, it's all white men. And so she's trying to protect sort of a very delicate social and professional standing. She does it in horrible ways, but then the business world is horrible. And I guarantee all the other men at that table have done worse. Yeah. So, you know, as a kind of like girl power 80s, you know, corporate rom-com, it's hard to watch it with kind of a straight face and be like, yeah, I'm rooting for, you know, Tess to be the new Catherine. And then one day she's going to feel that, I know they're trying to like get ahead of that. Like at the very end of the movie, she comes in and she discovers her new office and she's got her own secretary who doesn't want to be called a secretary. I forget. She had a good line about how I prefer the word assistant or executive. I don't know, I forget what the term was. But, you know, you get the sense that Melanie Griffith is going to be a kinder, gentler boss. And she's not going to make her fetch her coffee and we're going to be a team and you're not going to work for me. But like, how long is it going to last when she starts to feel threatened or embattled and she has to start protecting her station in this corporate office? It's just sort of like not entirely honest about what it's like to be a woman in this kind of corporate environment, which again begs the question why she even wants it.
That's the main issue, I think, that I would agree with. Yeah, the ending is fascinating because it does feel like this great professional victory for Tess now having her own office. I personally don't know if I understand how she didn't know what job she would have at this place, because I feel like there's like paperwork to sign, like there's official business to be cleared up before you get there.
They just like show up and she goes in and just decides that a cubicle is hers and puts her stuff down and like, okay, I'm going to be the secretary here. And I'm like, nobody had a conversation with you about what exactly the job was or where to go in HR when you got there, and you just like showed up and put your stuff down on somebody's desk.
Right.
And then I found like the last shot, I know it's supposed to be this triumphant swell, but I found it so incredibly depressing.
Yeah.
They have this, and it's a really interesting technical shot. There's a shot and it starts outside of Melanie Griffith's office and you see her sitting at her desk. It's from outside the window. She's sitting at her desk and the camera pans out. It's like a helicopter shot, I think. Yeah. And the camera pans out and then it shows, you know, a block of offices in that same building, and you see all the people at their desks, and then it zooms out and zooms out and zooms out in one long continuous shot until you see the entire island of Manhattan. And it's like she is just one cog in a very large wheel that is going to spin and grind them all down to dust. And just maybe that's tired millennial 2023 me talking, but I found it very depressing.
Yeah. No, I definitely picked up on that too. I mean, Mike Nichols had mentioned like he wanted to make this based on the screenplay, which felt very like, yay, corporate America 80s to him just reading it. He wanted it to be more sharp-edged in making a commentary on like Reagan politics of the time. And I do think he does that subtly here, because like you might not notice it at first on a first watch. And I honestly didn't even remember the ending having that effect until this rewatch. I mean, like you can sort of interpret it in different ways probably, but because like there's like this rousing music behind it, so it's not like this is like a downer ending. It's not like The Graduate where it's just like melancholy of like, what now?
Well, I think I needed like another decade of work behind me to be able to approach that ending and be like, oh no, that's depressing. Like in my 20s it might have seemed triumphant, but now it's like, oh god, okay.
Yeah.
That's our dream then. All right.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think Melanie Griffith is good in the role, and she fulfills a lot of the requirements of it, even if I don't care for some of how, like, for me it's like a little bit too understated for some of it. But yeah, I think she does her best. There's another line where she talks about being like a piece of meat, and it's just like, it's kind of hard to sell some of these lines, to be honest. But yeah, it's solid work from her. I wish I was a little more excited about it, but yeah.
I think there's some writing failures with her character. I don't think it's entirely due to her, the nature of her performance, but you know, it's not my favorite in the lineup. But what I do think she does well is playing somebody with intelligence who can be perceived as being kind of flighty and dumb, and she's not that. And I think that's not something everybody can do. So I do appreciate that she was able to strike that balance.
Yeah. And that's actually why I can see why they wanted to cast her in the remake of Born Yesterday, playing the Judy Holliday role, because that's very similar type of dynamic there. Even though she got a Razzie nomination for it, but that's another story.
I don't think there's any filling Judy Holliday's shoes. Like, there's no filling those shoes.
Exactly.
She was doomed. She was doomed no matter what.
Yep. So that's Melanie. Shall we move on to Meryl? Like another like completely going in the other direction with it. All right, Meryl Streep in A Cry in the Dark. So this is Meryl's 8th Oscar nomination. Really remarkable to me how quickly she was able to rack up so many nominations and great roles in her first 10 or so years of her career. And this is another one where we have Meryl doing an accent, and she's playing a real-life person. So this is based on the true story of Lindy Chamberlain, an Australian woman who made headlines in the year 1980 when her baby daughter was taken away by a dingo while they were camping in the Australian outback, and it became this huge news story, and there was suspicion thrown on her that maybe she had something to do with the crime, and she was ultimately found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, only for it to be eventually overturned when new evidence was found that absolved her. And it was like this huge cause célèbre, sort of akin to like the O.J. Simpson trial of the 90s in America. And there was a very fast turnaround where the book based on this case was released in 1985. And a film adaptation was announced very quickly after that, with Meryl Streep attached early on. So the film is following Lindy, played by Meryl, and her husband, played by Sam Neill, from the night of the incident to the public news sensation that it became, the trial, and people being suspicious of Lindy because she wasn't overtly emotional, as one might expect of a grieving mother to be, and she was vilified by the media, and we see this sort of private struggle that Lindy and her family had to go through. So let's talk Meryl, the marvelous Meryl Streep. Thoughts on her and her performance here? Another transformational accent performance from Meryl Streep.
It's not my favorite Meryl Streep 1980s performance, or not my favorite film, I should say. I think she's great in it. I think that she does a good job of, this woman commits the gravest sin, which is being an unlikable person, right? Like Lindy Chamberlain is kind of, unlikable is a strong word. I don't mean that she's a bad person or has done anything wrong, but she's not playing the right kind of social game. She's kind of weird. She and her family, they're Seventh-day Adventists. And so they have these strong religious beliefs, and the religious beliefs, I think, drive them to behave a certain way when their daughter is killed by a dingo and taken, instead of being completely distraught and broken down and and just totally ruined in public, they have a kind of, at first, Sam Neill ends up going through a crisis of faith, but they have an inner faith that kind of makes them strong in the face of this tragedy. You know, she's just kind of strange. She's got this strong religious faith. She's not particularly, I wrote in my notes, she's not particularly pretty, and that's not what I mean. She's not presented in such a way as to be, she's not doing the right show of maternal femininity,
Right.
For the public, and it makes the public turn against her, and it causes this kind of media circus. And so I think that Meryl does this incredibly good job of creating a woman that we sympathize with, whose side that we're on, but we don't particularly feel close to her at the same time. And that's just who she was, and that's how the public felt, is that they didn't feel close to her, and that made them turn against her. But I think she does this very sophisticated thing where she creates a sympathetic woman that we still don't particularly feel close to or like that much, which is also kind of like a bold way to play that character.
Yeah, this is, I think, really good work from Meryl, and this is such a fascinating movie that I do think is even more resonant now than it may have even been at the time, because I don't know about you, but it feels like we've sort of been getting so many films and shows lately that are like looking back on how the media and the public treated certain figures of like the 80s and 90s, especially like, you know, I, Tonya and Pam and Tommy, like People versus O.J. Simpson, even like Britney Spears coming out with her book and talking about how she was treated. And like, obviously so much of the true crime genre is about that, and just like the negative effects of being in the public eye. And especially for someone like Lindy Chamberlain, who didn't even have any aspirations to like be a public figure, obviously, like how hard that is to deal with and not just take what people say about you very personally. And I think Meryl really excels in playing with the tension of that, like how she isn't the most emotional person and how there is a remoteness to her that makes you a little suspicious at first glance. And yeah, there's something kind of like unreadable about her that is much more distant compared to most of the other performances I've even talked about from her so far, like Sophie's Choice or Silkwood or Ironweed. Like you kind of understand who she is deep down. But here she's very deliberate in keeping stoic and holding a lot back.
Well, and it makes the audience, it's a very smart performance because it makes the audience complicit a little bit, right? Because I'm watching this knowing the whole story. Like we're far out from these events, right? We're decades out from these events. So I know all about the Lindy Chamberlain story and that she was exonerated. And so I know the entire story. I've heard about it many times. And so even still, I watched this movie, not for the first time, I've watched it a couple of times. And I watched it and thought, did she kill her daughter? For like a second? I know she didn't, but because of the way that Meryl plays her, with that sort of remoteness and the inscrutability, that you become kind of complicit, where you're like, maybe she did, even though you know she didn't. And I think that's a really smart artistic decision on her behalf. And I think it's a really hard thing to do. I don't know that a lot of actresses would have the like boldness to play that character with that level of inscrutability and sort of like borderline unlikability. I think that the urge to create a sort of dramatic heroine out of her would be really strong in a lot of people. And Meryl is able to tone that down and play it realistically.
Yeah, or you could have an actress go in the opposite direction and just totally play it stoic to the point of being like almost blank. Like you have no idea, like there's nothing going on there. But I do feel like you're able to understand through these sort of frustrated looks that flash across her face how truly uncomfortable she is to be in this position, especially when she's on trial. You know, in doing research for this, I did find this like really interesting blurb about how there was a little bit of overlap with how the Australian media treated Lindy and how they treated Meryl when she was filming this in Australia. Because apparently they really scrutinized Meryl. She was like hounded by photographers. She was staying at this mansion during filming, and she was criticized for that too. And it had a bit of like a breaking down effect in Meryl that caused her to really feel that level of negativity that Lindy also felt. Obviously very, very different situations, but I think ironically, I think all that negative publicity for her may have, gotten her further into character.
Yeah. So like, it's not my favorite of the Meryl Streep movies, and not for her performance. I almost wish that this movie had been made with more distance away from the events a little bit.
Yeah. This is like
I
ripped
think
from
what
the headlines,
happens, yeah, it's like really ripped from the headlines. And like, not long after this, she and her husband get divorced. She remarries another man. And so I think that may have, knowing that and making the movie maybe with a little bit more hindsight would have made for a more complex personal story. There is sort of like a workman-like production aspect to the actual direction and the filmmaking, but the performances in the movie, and Sam Neill, I think, is as good as Meryl Streep in this film, playing a sort of righteous pastor whose faith is incredibly tested and who you start to think like suspects, what if she, they don't say it explicitly, again, because this movie is, smarter than that, and the performances are smarter than that, but you do sort of get the feeling of like, well, did she do it, or could she have done more to prevent it happening? How much does he blame her for this like freak, violent natural occurrence? And I think the real MVP of the movie, even more than Meryl Streep's performance, is Sam Neill's thighs in those tiny terry cloth shorts.
Yeah. He pulls it off.
God bless Australia. God bless Australia in the 70s for those tiny terry cloth shorts. He's got the longest legs I've ever seen on a man.
Yeah, I would follow him and his teachings. I'll just say that.
I'd be part of his flock.
Yes, exactly. Obviously, this is like a technical thing I just wanted to talk about, but like her Australian accent is certainly prominent, but not exaggerated. Like, I don't think, like, if we didn't know who Meryl Streep was, that it would appear to be super obvious that she wasn't Australian. Even when she's yelling and she has that famous line, of course, the dingo's got my baby, like, it doesn't slip at all. Like, she really feels like she's in it. And, portraying that initial panic of her baby going missing is so well done. The helplessness, the sort of numbness of it. Not that it's super distinct compared to how other actresses might have portrayed that sort of thing, but I do think it is notable that she's like so locked into Lindy's voice, her accent, which also has like this hint of New Zealand too, because it's not fully Australian. Like how even when she's crying or yelling or even like whispering, I feel like there's never a slip up at all.
Was the real Lindy Chamberlain, I think she was born in New Zealand and then grew up or moved to Australia. It's a complicated accent. And Australian accents are notoriously difficult to master. Like the vowels are very different from the way that we do it in America. It's a notoriously, as I'm led to understand, difficult accent to master. And I think people pretending to be Australian can read cartoonish, and she never reads cartoonish to me. Now, I'm not Australian. I don't know exactly how accurate to the letter her accent is, but I never got pulled out of the film by it.
And you easily could be in another actor's hands. And I do think also with Meryl, some people have accused her of being calculated in her acting style and maybe not as natural as some of her contemporaries, but I do think that slight emotional distance that you have is, again, really well utilized here, because she is not providing the expected emotional response that people kind of demand of a grieving mother. And you see in those like that initial TV news interview that just how remote she is, how she has her sunglasses on and she has like these downturned expressions. Or when she's talking to that like magazine interviewer, she really has her guard up. And it's like she is trying to very practically just set the record straight, tell the facts for what they are, but it's kind of like a damned if you do, damned if you don't type situation, where it's like the more she lays out the truth of everything, the more people will think of her as unemotional and cold and therefore guilty. But also, like, if she ignores all the rumors of everything that are spreading in the paper, it's like her family name is being dragged around in the mud, and it's like this lose-lose situation for her. And you see how, like, in her face, like, she's flushed and just like how frustrated she is that she feels trapped. So,
Right.
yeah.
There's a real guilelessness to it where she's just like, well, if I just tell the truth, everything's going to be fine. Like, I'll just tell the truth at court. I'll just tell the truth to the press, and I'll
Yeah.
just answer the questions honestly, and everything's going to be okay. And what sticks about the movie, it's kind of, and it's an interesting movie to talk about in conversation with The Accused, which we'll get to later, but you've got
Right.
these two courtroom dramas where the heart of it is whether or not you believe this woman who is an imperfect victim, right? Lindy Chamberlain is sort of an imperfect victim in the eyes of the public because of how she behaves and how she speaks to the press and how she reads on camera. She's this kind of imperfect victim. Jodie Foster in The Accused is also an imperfect victim, and so you've got these two courtroom dramas where the meat of it is how much we sympathize with these imperfect women who demand justice or who need justice, and how what you feel about them determines whether or not they get that justice. And so what I liked, it was like sort of scared of watching A Cry in the Dark these many decades later, is like you can see these same dynamics play out now where if you are an imperfect victim in the courtroom, I think of somebody like, and again, this is not an apples to apples comparison, but somebody like Amber Heard, when the Johnny Depp trial was playing out, it turned not into a trial of facts, it turned into a trial of how much do we dislike Amber Heard? Do we dislike her enough not to take her seriously? And so you still see these kind of dynamics playing out in 2023. Again, not to make a direct comparison between Amber Heard, Jodie Foster, and The Accused, and Lindy Chamberlain. I know it's all very different, but those dynamics of how much we sympathize with a woman in a courtroom are still at play.
Oh, yeah. It's tragic how still relevant both of these movies that we'll talk about here are. And yeah, like some of that, like not quite joking behavior that she has, but just like a little bit of sarcasm that she has, I think also lends itself to that feeling like she's not properly suffering enough. Why isn't she crying all the time? I love this scene where she's like kind of presented with the new details of the case that's being made against her from their lawyer, when it's like she's somehow like involved in beheading her baby and like going through this elaborate thing, and she goes on this monologue of being like, okay, let me get this straight, like I did all of this in 10 minutes, I made dingo tracks, meanwhile my other kid was watching and like we all went back to normal, like nothing happened. And there's like this air of like she has that very sarcastic kind of sensibility and is like kind of funny. And she's just like, can you believe that? Like, is this really their case? And yet it is. And then she's convicted.
Right. Because she's not a likable enough victim.
Yeah.
I do think it's like the least, something that I find so appealing about this performance is that it's her least glamorous role, I think, up to this point in her career. Yeah. Like she plays these, she'd won by this point, she'd already won twice, which is nuts. She'd won for Kramer versus Kramer, and she'd won for Sophie's Choice, which I think are more sort of like showcase dramatic roles.
Yeah.
And then you get to A Cry in the Dark, and they've got this kind of like unfortunate haircut on her. She's not glammed up. She's somebody who's kind of remote and distant. And so, but not in a way that's like, Oscar baity, in a way that just feels really authentic and natural.
I agree. But obviously I think the Oscar scene, quote unquote, is when she's on the stand, which I think is phenomenal work for her, with how she seems to be like on this razor's edge of falling apart. It looks like she's been crying just in her face, and she just maintains her certainty of what she saw, and she believes what's in her heart. And it's like she can't say exactly every single detail in her remembrance. And I love how you see her becoming like increasingly impatient, because this has been going on for 2 years by this point. And that look she gives that prosecutor, I think, is so powerful. Like, this is a woman who's like totally spent and so ready for all of this to be over. And she just snaps at him like, we're talking about my baby daughter, not some object. I think that's such a great sort of crescendo moment for her performance.
It really is. And it's also what like kind of damns her in the courtroom, like that kind of response and that attitude on the stand, because she needs to play a certain role for the audience that she she doesn't play. And as a viewer, like, you can get kind of frustrated with her because you know that's what she needs to do, right? And we're coming at it from a perspective after the fact,
and people
right?
are telling
But
her
we
that's what she
know,
needs to do. Also
yeah,
in the
people are
film.
telling her that's what she needs to do. You need to be a certain way. You need to act a certain way
Yeah.
so that they don't think you're guilty. But at the same time, you can think that and also be like, well, she's totally right. Of course she's frustrated. Like, this is all BS. And what's so great about her performance is that she's able to be this frustrating person that you just want to like take her and be like, just do this thing so you can get through this trial and you'll be safe. But also, like, why should she have to? Her baby got killed by a dingo. Like, we should sympathize with her. She shouldn't need to act a certain way. And so that even this far removed, you can still, or at least I did, can still feel that sort of like those conflicting viewpoints where I want her to be a certain way, but at the same time, screw that, she shouldn't have to be a certain way. Her baby got killed. We should be sympathetic to her no matter what, is the lasting power of that performance, and why that character, that person, that real life person, remains so compelling in popular culture.
Yeah, it is this very tragic, dramatic irony, I think, by the end for her. And even like, she doesn't react in a super emotional way, even when she's getting sentenced to life in prison. It feels like she feels on some level like this is coming. But of course, eventually there's the new evidence that's found, which was the missing jacket that was helpful for her defense, and she's released and is, visibly relieved, of course, but still kind of steely and wanting to make sure this doesn't happen again, and that she can fully prove her innocence.
And then, of course, ironically, they put her in jail for the murder of her daughter, who she didn't murder, and consequently remove her from the life of her new daughter, because during the trial she's pregnant with another daughter who she gives birth to, I think, in prison. And by punishing her for not being a sympathetic enough mother, they're depriving a child of her mother. And it's a horrible, very dramatic twisted irony.
But I also think by the end there is a version of this where she does provide like a more fragility after having been through prison for I don't even know how long by that point, but she kind of resists that urge to make it seem like, ugh, I've just been in prison for so long, toiling away, because it doesn't jibe with like Lindy's character to be outwardly vulnerable in that way. So she may have clearly suffered in prison, but she's not going to even show that. So I don't know. I just think that's really smart.
I think that's smart. I think that's also connected to the character's faith, or to the real life person's faith, right? Like she's an incredibly unwaveringly faithful person. And I think that can be, well, I'm not a faithful person. I don't have a religious affiliation. I'm kind of the opposite of Lindy Chamberlain in that respect. And it's hard to understand. Like, it's really, really hard to understand. Like, I can intellectually, rationally kind of understand that she has this guiding faith and guiding philosophy that is carrying her through these difficult times, but I also don't understand it because I am incapable of feeling that same thing. And so I think that's part of the thorniness of this character and Lady Chamberlain as a person, is that if you don't share that unwavering faith, it's really hard to understand where that person is coming from, because you're not capable of feeling that yourself.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's why, in that sense, this is a performance from her where it feels like you're having to do a little bit of work to fully understand the layers that she's working on here, because she could just come across as stoic if you're not fully paying attention to what's happening here. But no, I think she really understands her character very intimately, and is maybe helped by just like how the Australian press was not kind to her at the same time, and just makes it work. I really love this performance from her, honestly. I think it's, for me, one of her better of her nominations of the 80s, actually.
I think it's one of her better performances in a movie that doesn't entirely rise to her performance, for me at least. And not that I think that the movie is bad or that it fails in any kind of way, but I wish it was made with a little more artistry and was a little less workmanlike. To me, it has that kind of feel. But no, she's phenomenal.
Yeah, it definitely has a TV movie feel to it.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
That's not great, but I sadly think that what you said about like the film not rising to her level is a little bit of a pattern that Meryl has with a lot of her nominations.
Oh,
So,
for sure.
yeah, especially going
Not the
forward.
first,
Yeah,
not the first or the last time that would be the case.
exactly. Okay, let's get to our final losing nominee here, Sigourney Weaver in Gorillas in the Mist. So, unfortunately, we are already at the end of our Sigourney Weaver journey on this show. Certainly had a hell of a time talking about her first nominated performance in Aliens in 1986.
Oh,
And now here she is as a double nominee, getting in for Working Girl and Supporting Actress and Gorillas in the Mist in Best Actress. She also made Oscar history here, but in a negative way, because she became the first actress to receive double acting nominations in the same year, but not win for either of them. Because before this, we had Faye Bainter, Teresa Wright, and Jessica Lange, all of which got lead and supporting. All of them won supporting. Sigourney was favored to win for Working Girl, but didn't happen. Sad to see that couldn't continue the pattern there, but Gorillas in the Mist was a huge opportunity for her, obviously, to maintain her status as a leading woman and like play someone of great conviction. So Gorillas in the Mist is based on the life of Diane Fossey, who was an American woman who traveled to the Congo and Rwanda to study mountain gorillas, who were rare and still are rare. And in the process of that, she came to be this fierce protector against poachers and anyone who messed with their habitat, all of which led to Diane being murdered in 1985. So this is another film like A Cry in the Dark that's more or less ripped from the headlines and turned around pretty quickly. And much of the film is based on Diane's book, Gorillas in the Mist, which she released before her death. And we see in the film how Diane, played by Sigourney, gradually comes to love the gorillas and do whatever it is necessary to protect them, including torturing poachers and standing up to the government. She also has this romance with a photographer, Bob Campbell, and she takes on research assistants, and we just sort of follow her journey over several years of making this her home and gradually resorting to some rough behavior in order to protect the gorillas. So let's talk Sigourney Weaver here. Thoughts on yet another beloved actress and her performance here in Gorillas in the Mist.
Okay, just to start at the top, I adore Sigourney Weaver.
Yes.
It breaks my heart that she doesn't have an Oscar. I think she is very near the top of my list of actors, like not as high as Glenn Close, but pretty high in the list of actresses. I am very sad doesn't have an Oscar.
Yeah.
She 100% should have won for Alien. In this year I would have in a landslide given it to her for Working Girl. I think she's a brilliant comedic actress. I think she is also a brilliant dramatic actress, but I don't love Gorillas in the Mist. And I can't separate. I'm having a hard time separating my kind of dislike of this movie from her performance just because she's so central in it. I don't think it's that I dislike her performance. I think that she does a very capable, very fine, dramatic leading performance as this very righteous woman who is fighting the powers that be to do what she thinks is right in a very difficult place to do that. And she gets murdered for it. And, you know, I do think that she strikes a really compelling, dramatic leading figure in this film. She's stunning to look at. She's always stunning to look at. But I found the movie itself dated, melodramatic, a little bit tacky. As soon as I clocked the first fake gorilla, I got completely pulled out of the film. There are a lot of gorillas that aren't really gorillas in this movie, which they taught. You know, I read about the movie afterwards. I was like, that wasn't really a gorilla, was it? There were people in gorilla suits. They had chimpanzees in gorilla suits because it was safer for the actors to work with chimpanzees than it was to work with gorillas. They're obviously can be very dangerous animals, but it was also very obvious. You've got Sigourney Weaver in this like big dramatic moment with a fake gorilla in her arms screaming at people in a room, and I was just like, I'm sure she's lovely in the scene, but all I can look at is the fake gorilla. So I think she does a fine dramatic leading role of a very interesting real life person. Much like Meryl Streep, she's somebody who's not entirely likable, but I think the movie is trying to force a certain likability on her and on the audience. And I This was the only movie of all the movies nominated this year that I had not seen before,
Hmm.
and I kind of struggled with it. So I'm having a hard time because she is so much the movie. I'm having a hard time pulling her performance out of this movie that I could not connect with. What did you think?
Yeah. Yeah, fair take. I also, this is the only one I hadn't seen before this, so we're very much in that same boat. Was not knowing what to expect here because reactions have been all over the map from people who have seen it. First of all, obviously love Sigourney, and you see so much of that strength that she's had in so many of her other films, just really channeled here as well. I do find that she does have a sincerity in her screen presence here that does make you feel that she does have a genuine love for these animals. She plays it very earnestly, I think, and I think the fear is that it might become cheesy when it's a film about like a human's relationship with animals, and it's like it's tricky
Mm-hmm.
not to tip over into sentimentality, I think, especially with this being the 80s. This is like ripe for that kind of a sentimental movie. Yeah, I don't love the film either, but I do also think it's a lot like Aliens, where she takes something that could be cringy and a
Mm-hmm.
little self-serious, and for me, at least in her performance, makes it feel genuine. And she has
Yeah.
this energy that's kind of what I love about her as Ripley, where she's tough and you can really feel that she knows what she's doing, but she is also vulnerable in all the right moments, and she just has these pure kind of expressions of wonder whenever she's seeing, when she's observing the
Mm-hmm.
gorillas, that for me don't feel too over the top. I can see how some would argue that it is. It's just a really tricky character, ultimately, I
I
think.
don't, yeah, I don't think she's cheesy, but I think the movie is.
Yeah,
Like I think
yeah.
that the scoring and the work with the fake gorillas and the some of the writing, I think the movie, the supporting structure around her falls into sentimentality and cheesiness,
Yeah.
and it drags her with it, even though she's doing a performance that's better than anything else in the movie. Like I think
Yeah.
she is doing the most that she can possibly do with what she's given, but that the movie that surrounds her is so cheesy it can't help but like it doesn't give her a platform for this performance to sing,
Mm.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I may like the movie a little more than you, but I think
I
just
struggled.
with how she, for me, she does really carry it in that sense, because also what she does in the second half of the movie is really fascinating, because it's like really ramping up her protectiveness over the gorillas, and she becomes really obstinate and treats people poorly, this local population
Hmm.
who they're doing a bad thing, but they're also doing what they're paid to do, and it's not like
Right.
it's it's more the people who are paying them to do this, their fault,
Yeah.
but she doesn't have access to them, so she takes it out on the locals, which is not great.
Right. Yeah,
But
you've got this white American woman coming into this like economically devastated African country and then treating the gorillas better than the
yeah.
people who inhabit that country. And so I think I would have liked this movie a lot more if it had grappled with that kind of thorniness, that kind of ugliness, and treated her like a, I think Sigourney is treating the character as this complicated woman.
Yeah.
I don't think that the film is treating her as a complicated woman.
Hmm.
And you know, again, that was part of my disconnect, was from a certain angle, Diane Fossey looks like a really problematic kind of troublesome character, but on the other hand, she's doing it out of this sense of protection and love for these endangered animals. And so that's complicated. That's really complicated. But the movie, I feel, treats her more like a stereotypical kind of romantic heroine, even if Sigourney's not doing that.
Yeah. And especially in the romantic sense of literally having a
Oh
love
gosh.
interest, which is not my favorite part of the film necessarily, because it
As
feels
soon as the photographer shows up and she begins this affair, it was like, I was just waiting for him to leave. I'm like, please just go. I
yeah.
can't take this.
And like I know it happened in real life, so like it's justified in that sense, but I also feel like he doesn't really play a huge part in the film and like her journey necessarily, other than to just show that even with this person she seems to love, she still will easily push him away in favor of just protecting
Mm-hmm.
the gorillas. Like I get that on a thematic level, but even in those scenes that they have together, I'm like, okay, like I sort of wish I could be watching some of those more thornier elements that you mentioned of really examining her.
Well, then they could have they could have made that relationship a little thornier
Yeah.
in the film and made it interesting, right? But they play it, again, not necessarily Sigourney, but the film as a whole plays it in this, puts this like sort of Hollywood gloss so that it's this, horrid and all-consuming little romance until it's not.
Yeah.
And it's just very stereotypical, and it feels like it could be like copied and pasted from any number of different movies, and they could have gotten weird and complicated with it, but nothing about this movie is weird or complicated.
Yeah, it does very much feel like the Hollywood adaptation of a real story.
Mm-hmm.
Not in a positive way, to be clear.
Well, and probably the problem, and again, I've never read the book, and I don't know much about Diane Fossey beyond, a couple of articles and the Wikipedia entry that I read before recording this podcast. But she's to me, from my perspective now, she seems like a really complicated figure, and that you could have like incredibly differing viewpoints about the work that she did and how she did it. And I think part of the sort of structural problem of this movie from the get-go is that they're basing it off of her autobiography. Yeah. And so you don't get that complicated perspective of a complex woman. You get her one viewpoint, and no person sees themselves as being the villain or necessarily doing something that could be bad. And so I think doing it so soon after her murder and basing it off of her autobiography, like, you're not going to get a complicated movie out of that.
Yeah. And yeah, maybe this is another one where with some distance there could have been an interesting story told here. But yeah, I mean, I do think like when she's deciding, because the country of the Congo is going through a civil war, she has to go about this whole thing from a different angle. So she goes through Rwanda. I think that's interesting of her just like very much in the moment deciding what to do. I think she's good in that sort of improvisational element of it. And also, I'm very curious your thoughts on the scenes where she's mimicking the behavior of the gorillas, like either when she's among them or at home when she's kind of like pounding her chest and like scratching her head and doing all this business that could look silly to some. But what do you think?
I mean, it does look silly, but she doesn't feel silly. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, it is silly to walk in on somebody pretending to be a gorilla. Like, I think there's a scene where somebody walks in on her. She's in her hut.
Yeah,
and
it's her love interest.
She thinks she's she thinks she's alone, and she's like, acting like a gorilla, and he walks in on her, and it is awkward and it is kind of silly, but she sells it. Like, she is sincere. She is not self-conscious. It's not silly to her. It's very serious to her. And I think what Sigourney Weaver does so well in this movie is she sells you on this woman's obsession, which I think is a hard thing to do. Like, I think it's hard for any one individual person to understand a woman devoting her life to gorillas in Rwanda. I think that is not that there's anything bad about that or that it's not admirable, but I think it's hard for just an average person to understand that impulse that you're going to give up the life that you had, the career that you had, potential love interests. You're going to push everyone and everything aside in sole devotion to these gorillas. I think that's a hard sell for anybody to understand. And the saving grace of this movie and what makes Sigourney Weaver, I think, totally worth nominating is that she sells you on that devotion and that obsession. Like, I fully believe that this woman is obsessed with these gorillas and is devoted to saving them in a way that I think is, again, just really hard to sell.
Yes, certainly. There's a kind of, I almost want to say like sensitivity with how she approaches it. Like, it doesn't look like mocking, and it's like she just has this great feeling of respect for the gorillas that she's communicating with that just feels honest to me. Like, she just wants to be on their level. And so,
well, she has a sense of wonder too, that I think is just so integral to this performance, is that, like, even when she, like, it made me laugh, but looking back on it, I was like, oh, that's hard to do. She falls into some feces. I think she falls into some like gorilla feces. They're looking for the gorillas, and she lands in it, and she's like, ah. And then she's like, oh, it's gorilla feet. I forget the term she uses. It was a different term, but she gets really excited to have fallen in waste, in animal waste.
Yeah.
And it's goofball. Again, it's like the gorilla and the pounding the chest kind of like mimicry of the gorilla. It's silly, but also she is so full of like wonder and enthusiasm that you buy it, and that it's not that silly. It's oh no, it's silly to us because we don't feel the same thing, but she means it sincerely.
Right, exactly. And again, there is that earnestness that either you kind of lean in and just accept it and try to understand it, or you might be a little bit repulsed by it, perhaps, as a viewer. But I think it's compelling, obviously.
Yeah.
After when like some of the action happens where the poachers are taking over the guerrilla camp and she steps into this sort of almost militant mode where she almost tortures this young boy into telling her where the poachers went, and like storming into the restaurant to confront the guy who ordered the poaching, and like talking to the minister about like putting an anti-poaching policy into law. It kind of feels like 0 to 100 at first, but I do just find her very riveting, and just how she's able to channel that injustice into action and just knowing what to do, totally running on instinct to just like demand change. And it helps that Sigourney's voice is so commanding, I find. But like, just like in her Aliens performance that we talked about, there's like this underlying compassion that she has, at least for the animals, if not really for like her fellow humans, obviously. But I just feel like there is that just like emotional investment she has beneath that hard-nosed kind of energy she brings to the second half of the film.
I think her performance in like Aliens, both Alien and Aliens, I mean, she's exemplifies like what is so great about her, that she is at once very, very strong and imposing. Imposing might not be the right word. She's a very striking figure. She's very tall. She's got that voice. And she's not a cookie cutter beauty. She's got this very striking these very striking features. She's stunning to look at on film. There's nobody else who looks like her. So she's got this very strong sort of authoritative presence, but at the same time, she can be very maternal. You see in Alien, she's got this very maternal sort of like empathetic kind of like vulnerability about her, so that she's able to be both strength and vulnerability simultaneously and sell both of those things, I think is one of her just superpowers as an actress.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'm personally, even though I have read about Diane's behavior even before watching the movie, there is a part of me that still, up to the point of like when that one gorilla that she really loves, Digit, ends up being like beheaded, up to that point I'm feeling like, okay, maybe she did torture that young boy, but like it was for the greater good maybe in the end. I don't know. At least that's how she kind of justifies it. I'm kind of with her. But then after Digit ends up dying, that is sort of like her radicalization moment, when she just takes it out on the poachers and goes on this rampage. Like, and even her research assistants that she's now brought on are like terrified of her, and she's like hanging one of the poachers for a minute before like scaring him off. She's burning down the poachers' camp, and even after that, like it's not enough, and like when she catches two of the assistants having sex, she reprimands them and tells them to get off her mountain, which really just solidifies just how much ownership she's taken here, because no, this is not in fact her mountain. Right. Like,
in fact, you are a white woman from the United States. Like, very much not your mountain, which is again something that I would have liked to see. And you're not going to get it from a movie this close to her death based on her autobiography, but I would like to see Sigourney Weaver's performance in a film that takes all of that into more account and really unpacks it. Like what did it mean for this woman to come to this part of the world and act in this sort of way in protection of gorillas when there are these systemic societal issues that lead to the poaching industry in the first place. And so I would have liked a more complicated film for her performance to exist in. And then I think you would have had something really winning.
Yeah, I generally would agree. I just think the fact that they do show these kind of extremes that she goes to is notable, because I feel like we could have even sanded this down even more and made her into like a true hero. So I guess I appreciate that, even if it's not fully examined, like you said. But I do.
For sure.
I do think you kind of understand by the end how a woman like this would get to be this way after 5 years in this place and having just like this single-minded goal. And I think Sigourney kind of is showing those feelings of like almost entitlement, but also just a pain of knowing with each day that she could lose these animals that she's studied and that she loves, for all these years. So, I think ultimately the performance does work, even if the film itself is, as you've said, definitely not up to her standards.
I agree. She was captivating to watch in this movie. I think every moment of her performance, she was interesting, even when everything around her wasn't necessarily. Not that I hated the movie. I didn't hate it. It's like a middle of the pack kind of like 3-star movie to me. It's not that I hated it, but in comparison to the other movies on this list, it fell short.
Yes, but we love you, Sigourney, and we could tell, I feel like I can tell at least that she has a real passion for what she did here. So, and obviously she would kind of carry on this passion for fighting for endangered species throughout just Sigourney's career after this. So
I need somebody to write her like a really good role so that we can get her an Oscar. I don't think it's too late.
Yeah,
I think you could have easily given her, I mean, if they gave Oscars for comedic performances, which they almost never do, but I would have given her an Oscar for Galaxy Quest. She was hilarious in Galaxy Quest and sort of like poking fun at certain aspects of her career up until that point. And so I just think that she's a brilliant actress with great range, that she could do comedy, she can do action, she can do drama, and this sort of like strength and vulnerability that she possesses plays well in all these different genres. And I adore her and would love to see her get Oscars.
I know. Let's move on to our winner here, Jodie Foster in The Accused. So Jodie Foster in her first Oscar-winning performance, which she wins at a relatively young age, 26, but she was not necessarily like the classic ingenue at this point, because this is a relatively new situation, I think, that we have in Best Actress, where our Best Actress winner is someone that has been in the public eye since she was a child. Born in Los Angeles, she was gifted from a very early age, and her career began when she was just 3 years old in a Coppertone commercial. So she really has been in this business from like birth till now. She did a lot of TV. She did Disney movies like Napoleon and Samantha, One Little Indian, Freaky Friday, Candle Shoe. I think we mentioned on the 1974 episode, she also had a role in Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. So she was one of the go-to child actors during that era. And then her career took off even further with her role in Taxi Driver, where she played a child sex worker, and she earned a supporting actress nomination at the age of 14. And in the 80s, she graduates from Yale. There's also an incident that many people know where she had to deal with a guy named John Hinckley Jr., who became obsessed with her and attempted to assassinate Ronald Reagan in order to impress her. So,
like you do.
Yes,
like you do.
As one does. So that was obviously this huge public incident, and she had a lot of, sympathy for having gone through that. And after that, she starts appearing in adult roles, including Five Corners, and then The Accused comes and really elevates her even further. So The Accused is loosely based on a real-life case involving a woman who was gang raped in Massachusetts, a case that really was prominent and caused this national debate, especially involving the concept of blaming the victim. And Jodie saw this as a big opportunity to make a statement about rape culture and also to challenge herself as an actress. And as you can imagine, from what we see in the film, it was a very intense shoot for her to go to such a dark, emotional place. And the film centers on Sarah Tobias, played by Jodie, who is gang raped at a bar. Kelly McGillis plays Catherine Murphy, the attorney assigned to her case, and at first she thinks that Sarah won't be a credible witness because of her background, lower middle class woman, and because there's like this indication that she may have led them on and acted in a flirtatious manner. She gets a plea bargain, which angers Sarah, and to kind of make it up to her, Catherine decides to prosecute the men who were cheering on the rapists. and it goes to trial, which allows Sarah to tell her story from her perspective in the court. So yeah, let's talk our winner here, Jodie Foster in The Accused. This is certainly not an easy watch. So curious your thoughts
No.
on the film and on Jodie Foster, her very long career by this point, and what you think of her
Yeah.
here.
I can't be mad at Jodie Foster's win in this year. Like, I would have voted for Glenn Close. I'm fully a Glenn Close girl. I love Dangerous Liaisons. I understand why Jodie Foster won this year. I think it is, for the time, a very socially relevant performance, that they are making big statements about rape culture and how women are treated by the justice system and in the media. Again, like A Cry in the Dark, you have this imperfect female victim played by Jodie Foster, who's like the definition of an imperfect, I'm using quote marks, imperfect rape victim, where she's not wearing the right thing when she gets raped, and she's being flirtatious, and maybe she's leading people on, and she's lower middle class, and so she has all these sort of societal check marks against her when she's violently gang raped in a bar. I think she gives a great performance. That she does her I think Jodie Foster's superpower is that she is able to embody simultaneously this feistiness, but also this incredible vulnerability. She's so small. She's 5'3". She's a very petite actress, and there's a sort of like delicateness about her, but she's so feisty, and that you feel like she could climb up you and like claw your face off. She's so feisty, while being so little and sort of like delicate seeming at the same time. And so I think that this was a really striking role, given that she had been a child actress and that we had seen her in so many movies up to this point. And for this to be her first like really big grown-up film, I think you said she was 26 when she won, for this to be like her first grown-up film, this actress that we had sort of grown up alongside. It's kind of like a Natalie Portman situation, right? Where we watched this actress grow up and we saw her as a child in things, and went off to school, and is very intelligent, and then is in the big adult role and gets a Oscar win for that. So I'm not mad at this. I think she's really good. I think she's really good in kind of a tacky movie. I think this is a movie that you certainly feel the era in which it was made. Like it doesn't age entirely well in terms of the filmmaking and the score. And you can definitely tell that it's a rape film written and directed and financed by men. Like, it doesn't feel like there was a woman's hand in the background in creating this film. I absolutely hated watching the rape scene, which was interminable and kind of lurid and lingered way too long. And I understand the impulse to do that, to sort of like convey the horror and how long this felt to the victim. Like, I understand the point of that, but I don't think it was delicately done. But what I did appreciate is the courtroom drama aspect and finding justice for what society might consider an imperfect victim, and having that dogged determination to get that justice when the odds are stacked against you. I think that part aged really well, because I think that's still super relevant.
Yeah, I agree.
What did you think?
Another one that's not one of my favorite movies here necessarily, and definitely not one that is valuable on a rewatch, certainly.
Yeah.
I love Jodie Foster just in general. She has such smart instincts, I think, as an actress, and she has that toughness and that grit that I think is, pretty unparalleled for me among like actresses of her generation. And I think she also is maintaining that kind of grounded quality throughout so much of her career, and this performance is just such a pivotal point for her to really show that she has the goods to be a proper actress. I think the tricky thing with trying to assess this performance for these purposes is trying as much as you can to separate the emotional impact of the story from what Jodie is giving to the character.
Yeah.
And not every actress, I think, is able to create a fully fleshed out human being in stories like this. But I think Jodie is excellent in that regard. I think she is able to find that perfect balance between being tough but also vulnerable, of sort of being a person beyond what's happened to her. And you see this sort of even like a fun-loving personality come out when she's talking about astrology, or even like you're seeing this pain of not feeling fully supported by her shitty boyfriend, and she just never phones it in any scene. She is giving 100% to showing this woman to be that like live wire, kind of unpredictable, prone to outbursts of emotion kind of person, and she does feel fully three-dimensional to me.
Well, no, for sure. And I think in comparison to somebody like, she shares so much screen time with Kelly McGillis, who's playing her lawyer in this movie, and she feels very cardboard cutout, kind of like two-dimensional to me, like Kelly McGillis does. And I never get to the heart of her or why she's like crusading for this victim. There's never an interiority to that character. Versus Jodie Foster, who I feel like I know personally in that movie. I feel like I've met her character.
Right.
She so pops off the screen, and I think the most masterful part of her performance, and this is such a hard thing to do, is the lead up to the rape scene. That she's in a bar, she's mad at her crappy boyfriend, and there are some other men in the bar that she is like, well, I'm going to get some attention from them, and I'm going to have some drinks with them, I'm going to flirt with them, and I'm going to get the attention that I want right now to sort of like divert my feelings from how mad I am at my boyfriend. And so what's so difficult, I think, about that performance is because she is embodying this kind of imperfect victim, right? Like, she is dressed provocatively, and she is openly flirting with multiple men, and she is doing all of these, and again, I'm using quote marks, I'm not at all blaming the victim here, but doing this imperfect victim, kind of like engaging in this imperfect victim behavior. And I think especially in the 80s, the really difficult part of that performance is doing all of those things and like making you believe like how flirtatious she is and how hard she's leaning into flirting with these men in this bar for attention, but then also make you believe that she said no and she meant no, and they should have backed off when she said it.
Mm-hmm.
And for you to be able to follow that and then follow that arc of behavior and fully be with her character and fully sympathize with her character and fully believe her, I think that was a really masterful performance. That one scene, that's like the Oscar clip for me, is that scene in the bar leading up to the rape.
Yeah. And of course there's so much dread involved because you know what's coming later, that makes it even more heightened. And considering the way things were set up at this time, there's just a lot of judgment that is cast on her. And those moments where we see it flash across her face, this is after the fact, but like that what she did or who she is are maybe preventing her from getting the justice she deserves, I think are really, really heartbreaking. It's hard to describe almost, but I just find her face to be so expressive and just very in the moment responsive to what other characters are saying to her or like accusing her of, that she is such a compelling emotional center. I mean, there's been stuff written about how like this was sort of set up to be like this great leading showcase for Kelly McGillis, because Kelly McGillis has more screen time ultimately than Jodie Foster, but you walk away from this and it's like a totally different effect, obviously, based on what Jodie gives to it.
I can't remember a single thing Kelly McGillis did in this movie. I mean, I watched it a couple of days ago. I cannot tell you a single thing Kelly McGillis did in it. And I mean, part of that's the performance, part of that's the writing of the character. Yeah. But then I don't think Jodie Foster was given a lot on the page either.
That's true.
It's just she does incredible character work, and she's got like the best set of emotive eyes. She's got these incredibly expressive eyes where she's able to convey any emotion just through the look in her eyes. I just think she's a phenomenal actress. Yeah. And it's impossible for me to, as much as I have criticisms of the film as a whole, I think like Gorillas in the Mist, I have a lot of feelings about how the movie was made and some of the creative decisions behind it, and I think it feels dated, but none of that touches Jodie's performance in this.
Yeah, I agree. And this is one for me where I don't know if this is true of anyone else here, but like from the very first scene, it feels like she is like locked in emotionally, in the sense that like you could see automatically, even from the first scene, why she won the Oscar, because it's just her screaming and, you know, crying and running out of the bar and going to the hospital. And her like gasping for air at the hospital. She can barely even talk above a whisper, and just like that also combined with the huskiness in Jodie's voice, I think it's really visceral, because it feels like just like the wind has been knocked out of her. And of course it's later revealed that she was being choked at the time.
Yeah.
And so that's what makes it, even looking back on it, even more affecting, knowing what happened to her. And for me it feels almost like a method approach, even though she doesn't identify as like a method actress, but it really feels like she's like plumbing the depths of her emotion and really registering that discomfort, even though this is obviously a very upsetting and uncomfortable role because of what she's been through. She also feels very comfortable as a kind of like street smart, scrappy young woman who comes from a working class background, which like not every Hollywood actress is able to do, and like play someone of like a lower class in that way. But I think she does that.
Well, and she does it in a way that doesn't feel like poverty porn. Like, I mean,
Right.
she went to Yale, I think. Like, she's not, she's not lower class. She's not suffering at all. She's incredibly educated, obviously now very wealthy, but she's able to do this working class kind of performance in a way that doesn't feel like poverty porn, or like in a way that just feels really lived in and sympathetic. It was interesting because after I watched this, I watched Silence of the Lambs, which is the other Oscar-winning Jodie Foster performance, which was just a few years after this. That came out in 1991. It's a similar kind of role in the sense that she's playing somebody who came from a rough kind of working class background. She's more polished, right? Yeah. She's a more polished person. She's a more held together person. She's got this kind of, but you see that same kind of like grit and determination in the face of like really harrowing odds. And she's again doing this sort of person who's come from a more impoverished, lower class, rough background. Yeah, she's just really, really good at that.
Yeah. Of course, another film where she's taking the stand, and that scene being like a huge emotional showcase, just like with A Cry in the Dark, when Sarah is taking the stand and she has to just relive the trauma of that night.
Yeah.
It's very affecting. And, talking about the guy kissing her, but hoping like if she kissed him, maybe that would be the end of it. And then it just escalated, and they bent her over the machine and held her down and just raped her as all the men around them cheering them on. And you can see in her like the tears welling up. And like these are long takes that are just kind of trained on Jodie Foster's face. It's just really affecting. And when like the defense questions her about like how many men were there, who were they, and how like there's reasonable doubt about this, and Sarah, who is like so used to fighting and defending herself, she cannot say with 100% certainty how many men there were, who exactly was cheering them on. And so she knows it'll like hurt her case maybe that she can't say exactly what happened. And it's really heartbreaking to see her in those moments of feeling like defenseless in that moment and like naked on the stand almost.
But it's that honesty too that makes you care so much about the character. Like she's being honest. She doesn't know exactly how many, and she's gonna be vulnerable in that kind of way. And that the courtroom scenes, again, like with A Cry in the Dark, are so great, even while aspects of the rest of the movie haven't aged well. I mean, that feels like it could be in a movie from now, from today. Like our conversations about rape are as dire as they were in the 80s, and you still see the same kind of conversations about, what did a woman do to lead the men on? And was she really just a slut who was consensually having sex with too many men in a bar after having too many drinks? And it's the same conversation now as it was in the 80s, which is really depressing.
Yeah, it really is. And just to get to, again, the actual scene that is shown, the flashback that you mentioned, it's very graphic. I mean, the lead up to it, like you said, is, I think, sadly very accurate as for her being like the kind of, she's a party girl, she loves to have a good time, drunk, sloppy, giggly, all this stuff. And there is that dread where you know what's coming, and she obviously doesn't. So it's like she's just here for a good time, and then when they start to overpower her, she's just, writhing around and just like trying to get out of it. And it's really horrifying to watch because it just doesn't stop, and it goes on
It
for
really
like
doesn't.
10 minutes, I want to say, like this whole flashback sequence. And yeah, I mean, I definitely agree that it is lingered on probably a few minutes too long ultimately. At the same time, I do think it does really put you in the mindset of what she is going through ultimately when we do get those flashes to her face and what she's going through. So again, I want to separate the storytelling technique
Yeah.
from what she's giving to it.
Oh, she's fantastic. She's fantastic. What I wish the movie would have done, and it just is really kind of lurid at a certain point. Like, it is a really graphic rape scene that doesn't seem to ever end,
Mhm.
and I struggled with it. I don't even know how people who've been through a rape experience, or if they would be able to watch a movie like this. I found it not my personal experience. I've never, thankfully, ever been through that, but it was almost impossible for me to watch. At a certain point, I looked away from the screen.
Yeah,
I
it's hard
did,
not
and I
to.
almost never do. I almost never do that. I almost never look away. But like, by like the last minute, I was just sort of like staring off at my dog, waiting for it to end because
Yeah.
it was a lot.
Hmm.
And what I wish the movie had done, what I did like, a choice that they made during the rape sequence was they break away from the rape for a while to show what everybody else in the bar is doing,
Yeah.
who's not in that room. And so there's a cocktail waitress who is friends with Jodie, I think,
Hmm.
and she kind of is like peeking into the room and sort of looking because she hears commotion, and you sense that she understands what's happening, but she doesn't want to be a part of it. She doesn't want to insert herself or have the attention turned on her, and so she kind of walks away. And so I think a more responsible way to have filmed that scene is to have lingered more on the people in the bar who knew what was going on, who understand what's going on, but aren't doing anything to stop it. I think there were different artistic choices that could have been made that could have shown the audience just how horrific the event was without lingering on her agony in such a way. That being said, Jodie Foster's performance of that agony is impeccable and brave and incredibly vulnerable. And I can't imagine being an actress and displaying that kind of vulnerability in that long a scene. And I don't think being in a rape sequence is the reason she deserves the Oscar. I think it's one of many reasons she deserves the Oscar in this movie. I think everything that we've talked about that doesn't have to do with that rape sequence, like her performance on the stand and the way that she feels like a fully like embodied human being and like a person you might know in real life, and how she's able to like get into issues of class. All of that speaks to why she deserves the Oscar, not just the rape sequence. But I do think her performance in that scene it's saving grace.
Totally. And I read that they filmed the rape sequence first
Oh
in the
God,
entire production, and it took 5 days to do that.
I can't imagine.
And
I can't imagine.
like, as upsetting as it is to hear, a little bit of the justification of it is like, it's very dark to even think about it, but like they wanted to get her to a place of having experienced it, quote unquote, and then have her emotions track from there. And like, I get it, just like on a directorial level, it is obviously pretty icky when you think about it, but still, I think she is marvelous in this movie. And I think even in the smaller scenes, like even towards the end, I think she has a great one where she shares this rare light moment where she's waiting for the verdict, and Sarah is like telling Catherine her horoscope or something like that. And it's all about her like being a career woman who fights for good, and Catherine can sort of tell how much that means to Sarah. And rather than sort of like balk at it or whatever, she's touched and she asks her to sign it. And there's just like this really lovely energy of like trust and understanding between them, and just this immense gratitude that just like is radiating from Jodie. I think that's just a really small scene, but one that is very effective.
And then what I appreciate at the end of that movie and about Jodie's performance is that you don't get the sense when that movie wraps that she is a ruined woman, that she is a defeated woman, that she is going to be defined forever by this rape. You feel like she is going to be ultimately okay, that she is strong enough, that she has enough force of personality, that she is going to do something with her life after this.
Yeah.
And so it's as dire as the movie can feel at times, and as horrific as that rape sequence was, you do feel like Jodie Foster has the feistiness and the intelligence and the will to lead life the way she wants to after this. And so I really appreciate that feeling.
Totally. Okay, I think it's time to talk about why she won this Oscar. So let's get to the Oscar race here. To get to some precursors here, Jodie won the Golden Globe for drama, and this was a 3-way tie at the Golden Globes. She tied with Sigourney Weaver in Gorillas in the Mist and Shirley MacLaine in Madame Suzatska. Sadly, not nominated here, but would have been wild to behold a 3-way tie. I wasn't around to watch it, but Melanie Griffith won the Golden Globe for comedy. Meryl Streep won the New York Film Critics Award. She was a Golden Globe nominee, and Glenn Close didn't actually win anything, surprisingly, but she got a critics mention or two. But to be fair, the film premiered very late, and so there wasn't really, it wasn't really like on the docket to get those kind of precursor awards. So like it's a little bit of a different situation there. But in the lead up to the Oscars, from what I understand, from what I've read, it was very competitive. Although Inside Oscar basically says Meryl Streep, Sigourney Weaver, more or less out of it. Meryl because she already had 2. Sigourney because there was some thought that she had a better shot in supporting actress for Working Girl. Unfortunately, it didn't win for that either. But it was kind of written about as like a 3-way race between Jodie and Glenn and Melanie. So let's talk about why we think Jodie was our winner. What do you think? Because like The Accused, it gets 1 nomination just for her, and the other 2 are Best Picture nominees.
I feel like that happens a lot with Best Actress winners, though. I mean, maybe that's just a feeling, but I feel like often, it's happened multiple times, that there will be 1 nomination or 1 win for a movie, and it'll be Best Actress because that's the showcase piece. I mean, I wouldn't give The Accused any other Oscars. There are no other performances in that movie that stand out. It's not particularly excitingly directed or written. It's pretty, a straightforward sort of issue film. But Jodie's performance elevates it into something better than it would be otherwise. And so I do think it's a perfectly deserved Oscar. I think the reason she won it, to me, it's an issue film. It's a movie of its era that is commenting on something important socially, and she's genuinely great in it. And I think that is catnip for the Oscars, right? Like, how do you resist that? It's relevant, it's saying something important, and it's a genuinely good performance. So I think as far as the Oscars go, it's a slam dunk of a win, because I think Dangerous Liaisons is a really weird movie. That's why I love it. I love weird movies, but it's weird for the Oscars,
strange. Right?
Yeah, it's deeply strange. Like, what is it's got a weird tone. It's kind of a dark comedy, but it's like this sophisticated period piece, but also it's like what even is it? How would you categorize it? What genre is it even? And so I love movies like that, but I think for the Oscars, it's a struggle. Like, well, what is even this movie, and what Glenn Close is kind of crazy, and what are we even rooting for? And so I understand why it didn't win, but I don't know how you could avoid giving it to Jodie in that year for that film.
Yeah, I think a large part of her win is just how emotional the performance is, how raw it is. The rape scene alone is so harrowing, but very memorable because of how just open she is with her emotions. And I do think, as we know, it's not all about merit. And I think there is a narrative, a very compelling narrative for Jodie of being a child star, proving herself as a serious actress, and how the film did launch like some national discourse about rape and how to handle victims of rape with more sensitivity. There is just a rooting factor with Jodie that I think really made, I mean, as callous as it sounds, it made voters feel good about their vote for her. You know what I mean?
No, and I think that happens a ton in the Oscars. I mean, because the Oscars are political, right? It's not a pure merit-based breaking, as nobody has ever observed before. yeah, it's highly political. The voting body and the makeup of the voting body is political,
Right.
and who's in charge at the Oscars is political, and the films that are even nominated, there's politics in all of it. And often you can see the machinery behind the vote where it's like, I'm patting myself on the back and I feel really good
Yeah.
and like I'm doing a social good by voting in this particular way. So the Oscars have never been and will never be entirely objective and merit based.
Right.
It's always going to be subjective and political and tied to what's going on at the time, which is why I think a podcast like this is really valuable, and why I think looking back at the Oscars is really valuable, because you can learn something about society at the time by what was nominated and what won.
Mm-hmm.
So, you've got, of all of these performances, I think Jodie Foster's to 1988 audiences is the most socially relevant, probably the most, for them, the most challenging. And then also you've got that aspect of, here's somebody who's been in the industry for quite a while and they've grown up, and now this is like the big issue picture that they've made, and it's her time. There's an element of that too, when it's a person's time to win, and it was Jodie Foster's time, and it happened to align with a phenomenal performance in a movie that they could feel good about supporting.
Yeah. And I think with Glenn Close, she is on her 5th nomination already, but I feel like she didn't maybe have that kind of rooting factor, and her character is so despicable that it could have turned some voters off. I think they were less turned off by the Dangerous Liaisons performance than they may have been for Fatal Attraction the previous year. But I also think maybe there was also an issue of screen time, perhaps, because she's not in as much as you think. And then with like Melanie Griffith, I think her film was, from what I've also read, kind of fading at the time. It shockingly didn't get a screenplay nomination, and it didn't win anything else other than original song, which is deserved, for the record. We didn't talk about Let the River Run, but very deserved. Plus comedy is hit or miss in this category. So,
well, and a rom-com especially, like how often do
keep in mind
rom-coms...
we're coming off of Cher and Moonstruck, but Cher is her own entity.
that is its own special category. Yes. I wouldn't call Moonstruck as its own universe.
That's true. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's what it comes down to. We'll probably talk about a little bit more of that when we talk about questions from Twitter, which we got many of. So let's just get started here with Eric Maxwell Bruns, who said, "Is this a sneaky great lineup? And did the worst performance win?" No, I don't think Jodie gave the worst performance here, but I do think this is a really good lineup. I don't think this is a all-timer necessarily, but I think most of these performances honestly are pretty well known, like now, which we can't always even say. So
I think it's a strong lineup. And the thing is, I think you can make really compelling arguments for at least 3 people to win this Oscar. Exactly. I think you can make a very compelling reason for Meryl and Jodie and Glenn, but all 3 of them. And, I wouldn't have been mad about Sigourney winning. I don't think Melanie deserved it. So I think for though I really like that movie.
Yeah.
So I think of all of these 5, you could make a compelling argument for 4. You can make a super compelling argument for 3. And so I think that makes it a really strong lineup. I mean, to me, at least, usually in any given year, there's one person that pops out. And it's like, well, clearly that person deserves it. Yeah. And so to be able to make like a really compelling argument for 3 of them, and possibly a 4th, is, I think, makes it an unusually strong year.
Related to that, Ben Miller said, "Is this one of the most top to bottom competitive Best Actress lineups maybe ever?" Maybe ever. Yeah, sure. Again, there wasn't a general consensus even on who would win. Some thought it would be Glenn. Some thought it would be Jodie. Some did even think Sigourney could pull it off. So yeah, this wasn't one of those things where it's like, oh, okay, Renee Zellweger marching to the Oscar for Judy. That's not what this year was, which I think every year should be like this year,
Me too. I've gotten so bored in, like, especially I think like the last decade with the acting nominations, because it's all pretty much luck. And part of it's like how long the award season lasts now. Like award season starts earlier than it ever has, and it ends later than it ever has. Yeah. And so you've got like what feels like half a year of award seasons by the time you even get to the Oscars, and things are pretty wrapped up by then. And I wish they moved more quickly, and that it wasn't so locked up anymore. But yeah, like this is definitely a year that wasn't in the bag for any one particular actress. And yeah.
Christoph, if the Academy knew The Silence of the Lambs was just a few years down the road, does Jodie Foster still win?
Probably. I mean, I think I think it's what you said. It's something that they felt good about voting for.
Yeah.
And I think they still would have felt good about voting for it, even if they knew.
I would say it depends on when the Academy is polled about, like, would they do it? Because, like, in the 90s, I think they would be like, sure, why not? She deserves to. I feel like now that we have this renewed interest in getting Glenn Close an Oscar, I think they'd be like, maybe we'll just give that one to Glenn. Revisionist.
Well, if from 2023 you could reshuffle all of the Oscars to like more fairly portion them out, I think most people wish Glenn Close would win or would have won.
Yeah.
I think most people agree she's one of our greatest actresses and that she's done just so many powerful, memorable performances, and she's never gotten her flowers at the Oscars the way that many of us would hope. And I do think that this is the greatest performance of her career. Yeah. Also, I mean, I just think the Academy at that time, even if they had known, like, this is an important performance in a movie that felt important at the time about an issue that needed to be discussed, and it's something they could feel good about voting for. I don't know that would change.
Yeah. Rob Montoya said, the accused firmly planted Foster's transition from child actor to serious adult actor. Do you think this tilted the final votes to Foster? I mean, yes. I think it typically helps you not only to have like a great performance, but a great narrative behind you. When those two get together, it's like a deadly combination, ultimately. So, yeah, we pretty much already talked about that.
For sure.
Chels said, is The Accused the most successful SVU episode?
Yeah, I think you could make an argument for that. I don't think the production quality is necessarily that much better than an SVU episode. Like, I didn't find it as a TV movie of the week as A Cry in the Dark in terms of like the filmmaking craftsmanship, but there was nothing. There was like a workman-like quality to it, where there was nothing about the filmmaking that really stood out to me. Yeah. But yeah, an R-rated SVU episode, I can see that.
Yeah, honestly, I do think this gets at a good point, which is that while I was rewatching this, I did think of how like 20 years of SVU on the air and all the other crime procedurals we have nowadays does a little bit lessen the impact of watching The Accused again all these years later. But, you know, look,
well, we're so steeped in crime and true crime culture.
We're desensitized.
Like totally desensitized to it.
So, but ultimately the movie did have like a very positive impact on how we talked about rape culture. So it's still a net positive. Greg Creeman said, I'm the same age as Jodie and grew up watching her movies. When I saw The Accused, I thought Jodie deserved the Oscar, but now I think Glenn should have won instead. Have you ever watched a performance that you thought was Oscar gold, but then you changed your mind later on?
That's a good question.
I have a solid answer for that, personally. Like, I was 13 when I was rooting for Johnny Depp to win for Pirates of the Caribbean. But
fair
now,
enough.
I think maybe Bill Murray for Lost in Translation. Maybe even like Ben Kingsley for House of Sand and Fog. You know.
Bill Murray in Lost in Translation.
Yeah.
I'm sad that he didn't win that. Yeah, I don't know that I have a... if we're talking about people who've actually... I'm like cheating. I'm on Wikipedia right now.
It's okay. It's my number one resource. Hate to say it.
I'm like, I wasn't prepared for that. I mean, I don't know, like, if we're gonna go back to Kate Winslet, I was over the moon when Kate Winslet won for The Reader,
right? Because
I just wanted Kate Winslet to win an Oscar.
That's a good point.
And it took a couple years for me to look back and be like, oh, The Reader was not a good movie, and that was a problematic win, and I didn't really enjoy that much. And so, I don't know, like, yeah, you get like really emotionally attached to like your favorite actors and actresses, and it can kind of blind you in any given year where you're like, well, I just really adore Kate Winslet and want her to win an Oscar, and it's like, well, yeah, but maybe for something good and not this.
Yeah, that's a fair ask. Miles McHale said, what other former child star would you like to see make an Oscar-winning comeback? Ke Huy Quan has showed us it's in the ether. I'm going to say Macaulay Culkin, just playing like a total dirtbag in like a supporting role.
I would like to see, that would be great.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah.
He kind of embodies that sort of like dirtbag energy now. So it kind of works.
Yeah.
I would love to see Haley Joel Osment do something as an adult that's interesting, because one of my favorite movies of all time is AI. I adore the film AI. I think that was a slept on Steven Spielberg masterpiece that people have started to come around on, and he gives what I think is one of the all-time greatest child acting performances of all time in that film. And it is wild to me that somebody who was the emotional linchpin in both a film like The Sixth Sense and AI did not grow up to be like the world's greatest actor. So I would love for him to get his life together and go back to acting and do something great.
I mean, I think he is still acting, just in like very small things right now, but I could be wrong. Anyway.
I mean, maybe I haven't seen any of it.
No, I know, that's the thing. Related to this, Joey Gentili said Jodie Foster is as of now the only child actor to return with a nomination and win as an adult. Saoirse Ronan aside, who do you think will be the next child Oscar nominee to win as an adult? And then he lists Abigail Breslin, Linda Blair, Mariel Hemingway, Quvenzhané Wallis, or Haley Joel Osment as possibilities. So I imagined you would say Haley Joel Osment.
I mean, I don't think he actually will come back.
That's
it
true.
Was the
if
question,
that's the question,
like,
who will?
Well, then they took Saoirse Ronan out of the running, and she's like the obvious answer.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to say actually go off the board on this one. I'm going to say Anna Paquin. I think she could come back.
Oh.
Because like she was in The Irishman a few years ago. I think if she's in another big high-profile movie like that, I think she could easily get back in.
Well, and she's done some great performances as an adult as well.
Exactly.
She was in that incredible movie Margaret from 2011.
That's right.
Where she gave sort of a masterful performance in that film. So I definitely think that Anna Paquin could pull that off.
Yeah,
she's an interesting actress. She just doesn't get a ton of interesting roles that match her energy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a good answer.
Yeah. Fritz said a very obvious question. Do you prefer Jodie Foster or Kelly McGillis in The Accused? Certainly Jodie. I mean, Kelly McGillis is fine.
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That's mean. She's fine.
She's fine in the role.
Like she matches the SVU energy.
Yes.
Jodie Foster's just doing something on another level.
This is true. I think someone like a Kathleen Turner or like Sigourney Weaver could have maybe done something a little more with it.
Oh, now I want to see Sigourney Weaver in that role.
Yeah.
That's some good alternative cast. She would have brought an energy to that.
I think so.
That would have made that role pop. That's good.
Just saying. Let's see. Kelly McGillis was originally offered Foster's role, and Jane Fonda was considered for playing the attorney. Who would get nominated in that scenario?
Jane Fonda. Jane Fonda. I mean, she was a sort of perennial favorite.
She was
nominee.
It's true.
Anyway, and I think she would have brought also some pizzazz to the attorney role that was not present in Kelly McGillis's. But then I don't know what Kelly McGillis would have done with a.
Yeah.
I think I had read, and tell me if this is true, I think I had read that Kelly McGillis didn't want to do the rape victim role because she herself had experienced sexual assault. So I want to have some sensitivity to that. I don't know what she would have done in that role, but I don't know how she would have done it. I mean, she had had a real life experience with some sexual assault, so might have brought something very real to that role that would have made it powerful as well.
True. Marcel said, if Jodie was nominated in supporting, who would you kick out from that lineup? The supporting lineup, I guess. I don't know if that's the lead lineup or the supporting lineup. I guess supporting, if Jodie is in. Gina Davis, the winner.
Yeah. I was upset when I was like, who did oh gosh, Joan Cusack was nominated for Working Girl as well. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
And Michelle Pfeiffer in Dangerous Liaison. She's phenomenal in Dangerous
Yep.
Liaisons as well. And
Frances
she
McDormand, her
doesn't,
first.
oh, yeah, it's Gina Davis. It
Yeah.
has to be.
And if
That
Jodie is in
sucks.
supporting, which she's not really supporting, but like if we're saying this is
No.
the Kelly McGillis movie, then I guess on paper that makes sense, but no. Jodie would probably
Yeah.
win in supporting easily anyway, so
Oh, no contest.
yeah.
But I mean, if you were to like, decide who won this year between all the other nominees, I would have given it to Sigourney Weaver in Working Girl. I think she gives a really crucial comedic supporting performance. Like she's a linchpin of what makes that movie work as well as it does.
Oh yeah, I agree. West Side Wolf said, imagine the Best Actress films of this and the previous 4 years were all released in 1988. Who would have won? Sally Field, Geraldine Page, Marlee Matlin, Cher, or Jodie Foster? So all of these winning performances are pitted against each other. Who wins? I am going to say Geraldine Page. And the reason for that is that she had such a strong overdue narrative. And people loved that woman. And if you, again, I've talked about this when we talked about her win in 1985, the people leapt to their feet to give her a standing ovation for that win. So that's my pick. But what do you think?
I think that's a good answer. I think that's likely correct. I think I would still lean just barely still Jodie Foster, just because I think it really hits that sweet spot.
That's true.
That Oscar sweet spot of something that's timely, something that makes you feel like you're doing some kind of social good by voting for it, and also this actress who's been in Hollywood for a while, for her whole life up until that point, and had really had this breakout adult role. I think she hits a lot of sweet spots, but I think your argument is really good too. I think it's between those two to me.
It would definitely be a race between those two. Sophia Sibonello said, do we finally have the answer to your most heartbreaking loss? Yep. This is it.
Yeah.
This is it for me. Even though I didn't live through it, I really do feel like they passed up on Glenn's golden window of opportunity here. So yeah,
it's sad. And when I watched all of these films, I saved Dangerous Liaisons for last because I've seen it the most times.
Right.
So I was like, well, if I run out of time, it won't be tragic if I don't rewatch it because I've seen it a bunch. But I didn't run out of time. I watched it. But I saved it to the end because I was like, well, I've seen it a bunch, and also like I know that my favorite is Glenn Close going into this year.
Right.
So like, let's end with Glenn Close and see how it matches up to everything that I watched beforehand. And the sense of tragedy that I felt rewatching Dangerous Liaisons this last time, knowing we were going to have this conversation and knowing that I can't even be that mad at Jodie Foster for winning. It's not like a year where it's totally outrageous and I'm like, this is injustice,
Right.
There's not even that element to it. It's like, oh shit, we had two really, really profound performances in this same year, and either win would be totally justified, and that sort of makes it hurt even worse because you can't even be that mad about it.
Yep.
But she's so good. She's so good.
That is also how I feel about Glenn losing to Olivia Colman. So
right,
there you have
right.
it.
And I mean, at least with Glenn losing to Olivia Colman, like for me at least, the wife is she's great in it because of course she's great in everything. The Wife was a bit of a forgettable film to me, and it didn't have any lasting power, whereas The Favorite was something that was really striking, and The Favorite was almost the Dangerous Liaisons. It's weird.
That's true. Yeah.
Like I would compare The Favorite kind of to Dangerous Liaisons in the sense that it's this really sort of like high-pitched, strange, twisted historical piece that you can't easily categorize.
Right.
And it's a really weird, wild, funny, sad, strange mixture of a movie. And so, whereas The Wife was a very straightforward, kind of predictable, dramatic film, and with a stereotypical dramatic leading performance. And so it's kind of funny that then Glenn does the Oscar baity kind of thing and loses it to the weird movie. Whereas, yeah.
Can't win for losing. Yep. David Krasner said, did Dangerous Liaisons miss the Globe lineup, and had they included that film and Glenn in their selections, how would that have shifted the race? And the bigger question, how do we move on from the trauma of Glenn's loss here? Well, I still haven't moved on from it, so I'd love to take anyone else's advice, but yeah, because Dangerous Liaisons did open so late, it wasn't able to compete at the Golden Globes. If Glenn actually did win there, I think it is possible that she gets some momentum for the Oscar win. I don't know if it's like a guarantee necessarily, but it's closer.
That's what I agree. Say. And I think coming so close off the heels of Fatal Attraction,
exactly.
Like, I think definitely if she had gotten that sort of win in her sails from a Globe nomination, that it could have absolutely changed the race.
Yep. Chelsea said, Glenn, a baddie, a hot girl. I'm sorry they failed you. Would you trade all her nominations after this for a win here? Yes, I would. I very much would, and I think she would be probably fine with that too. She would have an Oscar in 1989, and she would still have a great career. She would still win Emmys for Damages, and she would still be Cruella de Vil, and she would have an Oscar. So I think I would happily take that if she didn't get any nominations after this.
I think the best way for us to get over the trauma of her losing this year is to give it to her for something still. Like, she is...
Thank you.
She is 76 years old. She is entirely possible that she can live another 20 years and act that entire time. She's a phenomenal talent, incredibly driven, and is still acting very regularly. And you know what, let's just write her a meaty role and give her a goddamn Oscar. That's how we get over it.
You're preaching to the choir here. Jack Mahane said, how was it that Glenn Close, who was on her 5th nomination in a Best Picture nominee with a lot of above-the-line support, winning Adapted Screenplay, ended up losing to someone who was the only nomination for their film? So obviously we already talked about that. Again, I think also her role being so villainous, Jodie being so sympathetic, having that narrative. Again, we already sort of mentioned that, so I don't want to dwell on it further. Amy Thomason said, if you had one Oscar and you could give it to Glenn this year or for Fatal Attraction, which performance would you honor? This one, personally.
100%.
Yeah, because
no question.
Last year, I think we had Cher, we had Holly Hunter. I would have been happy with either of them winning too, if not Glenn. So here, I'm more upset that she didn't win.
And I think Fatal Attraction is kind of a sexist, kind of a gross movie. She's great in a movie that is treating her character dirty. So I would vastly prefer her to win for something like Dangerous Liaisons.
Yes. Celluloid Siren said, Glenn's masterful performance stands out as an odd one out in this lineup, as she's the only one playing an unsympathetic role compared to the others here. Do you think that cost her the Oscar? And do you think the Oscars have a bias against ruthless women for a win?
I think when they're ruthless in a way that they can understand, like I think of Louise Fletcher winning for Nurse Ratched in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, or I think of Kathy Bates in Misery. I do think they are inclined to give it to easily villainous roles.
Yes.
Right? Like I think something like Nurse Ratched and Misery, like I think those are easy to understand, sort of like a little bit scene chewing villainry. And I think something like Glenn Close is more like, oh, you're just a vicious, manipulative woman, which is different from being a villain. So I guess it depends on how you analyze that question.
That's true. Yeah, I just think of like things that have come after, like Rosamund Pike and Gone Girl, Carey Mulligan and Promising Young Woman a little bit. Not that she's a villain, but it's like doing ruthless things. So, yeah.
I think an obvious sort of like easy villain
that's true.
Can win with the Academy.
Like
but when you
Joker.
Get to like like the Joker.
Yeah.
Well, men have an easier time of it, I think, in this sort of villainous role.
Yeah.
And in life in general. But with I think these sort of like kind of nastier women who aren't outright villains, I think they do suffer and have a harder time of winning.
Yeah. Jeremy Kaplan said, time for a dangerous swap. Would you prefer to see Glenn Close in 1935's Dangerous or Betty Davis in Dangerous Liaisons? For me, definitely I would love Betty Davis in Dangerous Liaisons. Are you kidding me? It's like a role that Betty would have dreamed of having.
Yeah, Betty Davis is my favorite actress.
There you go.
Maybe my favorite actress. So yes, I would say Betty Davis in Dangerous Liaisons. So I would not turn down Glenn Close in Dangerous.
Sure. Miles McHale said, did Melanie's personal life eventually overshadow her movie star career? Probably.
I mean, I think probably,
yeah.
Because when I think Melanie Griffith, I don't think of any particular roles first. I think of Dakota Johnson, and I think of her mother, and I think of Don Johnson, and I think of Antonio Banderas, and I think of her romantic life and personal struggles and her sort of like acting dynasty before I think of individual roles, which now that I'm saying that makes me feel bad and like part of the problem.
Yeah, I mean, once someone becomes like a tabloid sort of presence and has personal scandals, it does tend to sadly overshadow someone's actual talents. And I do think she is an example of that.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Kerr said, through the lens of today, how much fun is it to watch Melanie Griffith get back at Kevin Spacey with the shake of a champagne bottle in Working Girl?
I was surprised when he popped up on screen. I wasn't braced for it.
It's a jump scare.
It's a jump scare for sure. But he was playing a type that feels appropriate.
Yeah, just like a coked out of his mind businessman in a limo being a pig, and she just
I'm like, makes sense. I mean, part of I guess revisiting anything Kevin Spacey, it like works to his benefit that he's played so many sort of like lecherous, monstrous people, because it's like, well, it doesn't ruin my enjoyment of the movie Seven because he plays a sociopath who's murdering a bunch of people. Kind of feels on point.
Yeah. It is what it is. Yep. Fritz has a very shady question. Does Tess from Working Girl deserve a big career in the business world if she doesn't even know what job she has at the end of her movie? Fair point.
I feel like we kind of touched on that, answered it a little bit. Like, it does raise some questions, doesn't it?
A little bit. More of a screenwriting thing than a character thing, but yeah.
Yeah.
Amar said, on a scale from Julie Harris in The Member of the Wedding, parentheses, most annoying, to Marsha Mason in Only When I Laugh, parentheses, least annoying, how annoying is Melanie Griffith's performance? Ooh. I don't think it is an annoying performance, so more least annoying. I just think, again, it's like a little understated for me than I want it to be.
It didn't like grate at my nerves. It wasn't annoying. It's just kind of there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't find it an actively bad performance. I find it, a fine performance in a charming movie. So I wasn't actively irritated by her. I also, she just wasn't doing much for me.
Yeah. Joey Gentili said, Lorraine Bracco stated in her memoir that she was pissed she lost out on Tess in Working Girl. In a world where Lorraine Bracco got Working Girl and Melanie Griffith got Goodfellas, do you think both roles would be still be as remembered as they are today? Would have been a different flavor to each of those roles. I do worry that Melanie Griffith being in Goodfellas might be dismissed a little more as like not as weighty as what Lorraine Bracco brings to that. So yeah, but Lorraine Bracco in like fabulous 80s hair, I would just love to see. So
yeah, I'm not as interested in seeing Melanie Griffith in Goodfellas. I am interested now in Lorraine Bracco in Working Girl. So if we can make that happen,
yeah, with that accent of hers, that would be really fun. Jonathan Edwards said Melanie was originally offered Gina Davis's role in The Accidental Tourist, but had to choose between that and Working Girl because of schedule. Would Melanie have won supporting if she did The Accidental Tourist, and who would have likely been Tess in Working Girl? Well, this is where I once again plug Meg Ryan. for Working Girl. I don't think Melanie would have won supporting because, like, sort of what you were saying, like, I think personal life may have gotten in the way of her winning the Oscar.
Well, I don't even think Gina Davis deserved it, and she's a better actress.
Exactly.
So I don't think that's gonna work in her favor. Now that you've said Meg Ryan and Working Girl, I can't see anything else. So
yes. Viscount TJ said, quite a take here, is this Meryl's weakest role to receive a nomination?
Absolutely not.
That's a hard no for
me. Absolutely not. I mean, she won for the Iron Lady, and that's a weaker role. So.
Now we said it. Yeah. But even like in the 80s, like French Lieutenant's Woman, I'm not a fan of. Out of Africa is
I don't snooze, like Out of Africa. So. That's probably like the least of her. I have a lot of problems with Out of Africa, and I think that's like the least interesting of all of her nominations, probably maybe ever. So, no, I think she's fabulous in Cry in the Dark. I just, again, with perspective looking back, she didn't need 3 Oscars in a single decade, right? Like, we can spread the love a little bit, even though her performance was great.
Yes. Emily said, is there anything as unfortunate as that "a dingo ate my baby" line being memed because it turned out the woman was telling the truth?
She also just said "a dingo took my baby." It's not the way we remember it, right? The line, I think, is a little bit different. It's not "a dingo ate my baby," it's "a dingo took my baby," and a dingo did take her baby. But also, humans are horrible, and it is a funny line. So I can't blame us for memeing that.
Human nature, I guess. Yeah, but it is unfortunate, obviously, for her. That's just like having to endure jokes about it. Not great.
Yeah. No. But we're a terrible people, and so this is what happens.
There you have it. James said, is Meryl this year the non-winning nominee with the biggest cultural impact outside of the context of the Oscars? The memification of "the dingo ate my baby" lasts to this day, while the film seems relatively unseen and forgotten. Any other good favorite examples of this?
That's a good question.
I mean, Fatal Attraction is not unseen or forgotten, but like when people talk about Glenn and Fatal Attraction, Bunny Boiler, I Won't Be Ignored, Dan, just like Fatal Attraction becoming a way of like referring to someone, you know.
Well, and I think there are like things that we remember that have nothing to do with, or like things around wins that we remember that have nothing to do with the performances. Like I think of somebody like Halle Berry in Monsters Ball, and I think when we think Halle Berry in Monsters Ball, we think one of two things. We think first Black woman to win the Oscar, and then we think, or at least I do, her getting kissed by Adrian Brody at the Oscars the next year, right? So like you have things, this isn't exactly what the question was, but around wins, you have things that totally overshadow the nature of the performance itself. I don't think I've watched Monsters Ball in 20 years, and I can't remember anything about it outside of Halle Berry doing a really sort of vulnerable torrid sex scene. And that those other elements. And so, I mean, that's really unfortunate that you have the first Black actress winner ever of all time, and then all you remember are those little things because the movie itself wasn't a hugely memorable thing.
That's a very good point. And speaking to that also, this is like a much lighter example than that, but Sally Field being like, "You like me" in her speech has very much overshadowed her performance in Places in the Heart. So
absolutely,
I think that's a good one for that.
Yeah.
Christoph said, by this point in her career, detractors started to joke about Meryl Streep as an accent-nailing acting machine who is lacking personality of her own. Having followed her path chronologically, do you see where they're coming from, or is this nothing but jealousy?
I mean, I think it's jealousy and a bit of misogyny because, like, I've never heard that said about male actors who do the same thing. I don't know. I just have sort of like a knee-jerk reaction to like that kind of criticism of Meryl Streep. I don't think it's necessarily jealousy so much as it is like, here's a very accomplished, very successful actress that is rubbing you the wrong way for some reason that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the films she did in the 80s are difficult to watch, I would say, just in terms of how intense she gets with the role. And I guess you could say it's a little repetitive in that way, but she is also doing wildly different things in every single film. So I think maybe it's just easy to take for granted that like Meryl Streep is going to be great every time.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think it's more of a symptom of like the types of dramatic films that were being made in the 80s. So like if she's getting cast as like the lead dramatic actress in these big dramatic films of the 1980s, and there's like a sort of sameness to it, I think that's a symptom of the films that are getting made and not of Meryl Streep's performances, because like you said, they're all very different. She's doing something very different in Kramer versus Kramer than she's doing in A Cry in the Dark, than she's doing in any other movie. So she's not doing the same or Sophie's Choice, she's not doing the same performance over and over again, but we are making the same type of dramatic 80s film over and over again and casting her in it. So I don't think it's her fault.
And she does kind of try to do different things going into the 90s, like comedies like Death Becomes Her and She-Devil.
My God, I love Death Becomes Her. And she's also, She-Devil, she gives a great comedic performance. Obviously Devil Wears Prada, she does something like incredibly sophisticated and funny in that as well. I mean, she's not a one-note actress. I can see how like living through the 80s and seeing her win again and again and having to watch these like 3-hour-long dramatic epics, you're like, okay, enough Meryl Streep. But I don't think that's a Meryl Streep problem.
Right. Andrew Carden said, was Sigourney closer to a win in lead or supporting this year? I think supporting for sure. She won the Golden Globe for Working Girl. I know she won for Girls in the Mist too, but that was a 3-way tie, so that's complicated. And she was widely predicted to win for Working Girl, so I assume she would be closer for supporting, but who knows?
Yeah, your logic checks out.
Look Home said, has there ever been an actress with as diverse a nomination resume as Sigourney? Can her 3 nominations be any different? In terms of genre, like, Aliens, Gorillas in the Mist, Working Girl, I would say are pretty far apart. Although, I do think, I don't know if you'll agree, but there is like a tiny bit of overlap with Aliens and Gorillas in the Mist in terms of like tough, protective role.
I think we talked about that. I think we talked about that talking about Gorillas in the Mist, that she's able to be both like very fierce and dominating, but also have this like maternal instinct about her. And I think you see that both in Aliens and in Gorillas in the Mist for sure. But she does have a really great range where she's able to do these very intense action roles and these straightforward dramatic roles, and she's a really gifted comedian as well, so she's got really great range.
She has the range. Yep. Ben Roberts said, Jessica Lange was originally cast to play Diane Fossey in Gorillas in the Mist. Do you think she would have gotten a nomination? Knowing how much they loved Jessica Lange in the 80s, yes. I'm going to confidently say they would have nominated her.
I mean, she's been nominated for worse than that, so yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
She's won for worse than that, so
yeah. There you go. Yep. Christoph said Sigourney Weaver and Scarlett Johansson are, as of today, the only actors with 2 nominations on the same night that never won an Oscar in their entire career. Which one of them do you expect to finally win their Oscar sooner?
I mean, probably Scarlett Johansson, because she's younger and they're going to write roles for her and not for Sigourney Weaver. I mean, if we're just being brutally honest.
Yep. I agree. But I don't think this is the end of the road for Sigourney. I do think she could easily get a juicy supporting, sort of like Jamie Lee Curtis or like Laura Dern, like that kind of thing.
And if we have to do that for Glenn Close, let's do it. I mean, I don't even care how she wins at this point. Let's just do it.
Yep. Agreed. Speaking to that as well, Amanda BW said, this is Sigourney's last Oscar nomination so far. Which currently working director would you like to see her work with to get her back on track to awards potential?
I mean, she's been working. I want James Cameron to make something that's not Avatar, because she's been working with James Cameron still, and they have a great track record together. And I don't know. I don't know that he's directing people in things that win acting Oscars, though, come to think of it. I don't know.
Never has.
I don't know. Who else? No, he never has. So that's not a good answer. That's actually a really bad answer.
She could get nominated for something, but I agree. Winning is probably off the table, maybe, for a James Cameron movie. I was going to say Jane Campion. I don't know. I think it would be fun to see her work
Yeah.
with like a challenging, sort of cerebral kind of director like Jane.
Yeah, I can see that.
Even though
I
The
can
Power
see
of the
that.
Dog didn't win any nominations, but still.
It didn't. It should have, but it
Yes,
didn't. I love Power of the Dog. That's
me too.
one of my favorites in recent history. I don't know. What's Catherine Bigelow up to? Has she
Not
why
much.
isn't she directing it? I
I
know.
don't know
Why
where she
is
is.
that?
Yeah, that would be
I
a
think
good
she
fit.
could I think she could create a good like powerful
Mm-hmm.
role for an elder Sigourney Weaver
Yeah,
to get her back into this Oscar conversation, but I don't know what Catherine Bigelow is up to, which is crazy.
yeah. Kenneth Israel said 1988 also marks the Welcome to the Club nomination to one of our greatest living actress sexuals, Pedro Almodovar. Who among these 5 actresses do you think would fare well the best in the Almodovar cinematic world?
Oh,
I'm not just saying this because it's me, but I do think he would be very paired well with Glenn Close, because
yeah.
there is like Glenn has a love of theatrics and a little going heightened at times that I think would lend itself nicely to an Almodovar film.
Yeah, I don't think Melanie has the
No.
range for that. Yeah, I think one has to be at like that sense of like heightened dramatics that she can
Yes.
tap into, which we see in Dangerous Liaisons and elsewhere. Like, I think the second one I would be most interested in is Sigourney. I think it would go Glenn,
Yeah.
Sigourney, and then a mix of the others.
Maybe that's the answer for who she should pair up with
Right.
next. Pedro Almodovar, Sigourney Weaver. Let's go. Miles McHale said, how close was Michelle Pfeiffer to being double nominated for Married to the Mob? Well, she did get a Golden Globe nomination, so I'm not going to say it wasn't impossible. Dean Stockwell did get an Oscar nomination in supporting actor, so I don't know, on the radar, but also, like, once there's multiple comedy performances in a race, they usually just pick one, and Working Girl was the
Yeah.
chosen one here.
Yeah, very much so.
Mm-hmm. Dark Shaka said 2 great comedy performances were snubbed this year. Thoughts on Susan Sarandon in Bull Durham and Jamie Lee Curtis in A Fish Called Wanda?
I think Jamie Lee Curtis in A Fish Called Wanda is like the pinnacle of her career.
Yep.
Probably in terms of like comedic acting.
Mm-hmm.
If I could give her an Oscar for anything, it would be that. I don't think she did much.
True Lies.
I don't know. True Lies is really
Speaking
great too.
James
No, I'm just thinking of like what she won for, like Everything Everywhere All at Once. She was kind of like the least interesting aspect of that movie to me. So
Agreed.
It definitely felt when they gave that to her for that film that it was kind of like, okay, well, you're due. You've
paid your dues. Right.
You've paid your dues. We all love you, and you come from this acting dynasty, and so you deserve it. Here you go. So I don't begrudge that win, but like, it definitely doesn't speak to her comedic powers the way that something like A Fish Called Wanda does.
Agreed. Juan Carlos Ojano said, who do you think was closer to a nom? Michelle Pfeiffer in Married to the Mob or Susan Sarandon in Bull Durham? Or do you think it was someone else? I don't know. I think they're both, again, in the discussion, but I would guess Susan Sarandon in Bull Durham maybe had a more traditional kind of performance and film that would get nominated.
Yeah, I lean a little more Susan Sarandon in Bull Durham.
Yeah. Lots of questions about Shirley MacLaine not making it for Madame Suzatska, despite winning the Golden Globe in that tie with Jodie Foster and Sigourney Weaver. I haven't seen that movie, but from those who have, I've gathered that it's kind of like old-fashioned grande dame kind of stuff from her. Maybe there wasn't urgency to get her another nomination after her win for Terms of Endearment. I can't really speak to why she missed, unfortunately.
Yeah, I haven't seen that movie either, but also I don't know that at the stage in the career that she was in, having won very recently for still a very memorable performance and a film that holds up, like, I don't know what the urgency to give her an Oscar that year, for this year would be.
Right.
I know we love Shirley MacLaine, but she just won for Terms of Endearment. It's fine.
It's fine. Last one is a recasting question from Joey Gentili, who said, recast these 80s Oscar talents and Karen Black in the roles above. Karen Black, Isabella Gianni, Goldie Hawn, Tess Harper, and Amy Irving.
So we're casting them in these roles.
Correct.
I don't know, man. Go for it. You're really good at recasting. Like, you really nailed it a couple of times. So I'm going to let you take this one.
Yeah, well, obviously, having seen this question before, I've already made my combination. So I'll just bounce off of you and see what you think of these. I'm going to say for the accused, I think Amy Irving could maybe do it.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, at least she seems like the type for that among these.
She has a grittiness and a vulnerability that I think could translate well. Yeah, okay.
Easiest one I would say is Goldie Hawn in Working Girl.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
No question. And she would be great.
Yes, she would. I would do Isabelle Adjani in Dangerous Liaisons. And not just because she's French.
Though I don't think that hurts.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think she would be devastating and cold, especially like a little bit older Isabelle Adjani. From there, it's a little tough. I don't really love these options, but this is what I have. Tess Harper in A Cry in the Dark. Sure. And Karen Black in Gorillas in the Mist.
I don't like Karen Black in any of these.
Yeah, I don't think she would really fit in.
I mean, I think she has her place and her time, and I don't think it's in these roles, but
yeah.
I guess that's the least amount of damage you could do.
Okay. I think she could play up like the maniacal stuff that Diane Fossey gets up to at the end pretty well. I don't know. Maybe that would be too campy. Anyway.
It would be campy, but like maybe that would make the movie a little more interesting.
That's true. Well, on that note, it's finally time for our last segment where we will reveal who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. Barbara, who do you think it was?
The runner-up is the winner in my heart, who is obviously the great Glenn Close.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she's one of our greatest living actresses, and especially one of our greatest living actresses who doesn't already have an Oscar. And for me, Dangerous Liaisons is her most complicated, thought-provoking, challenging, and phenomenal performance. I could watch Dangerous Liaisons probably on a loop and not get tired of it. I think it's captivating. I think she's playing a really complicated woman who has justifications for herself, given the era that she lives in and what she's experienced, that there are justifications for her for the way that she is behaving that is very challenging to the audience to understand and accept. And I've had to watch the movie many times to really understand what it is that she and the movie are doing. And to me, that is a signifier of greatness. I just think she is as good as she has ever been in her entire life in Dangerous Liaisons. And I think especially given hindsight and looking back and seeing and knowing in 2023 that she's never won an Oscar, it really hurts that she didn't win this year. And if I could go back and change it, I would give the Oscar to Glenn Close for this performance. And I really do think it's the pinnacle of not that she never did anything after this that was deserving of Oscar gold and glory, but I do think that this is as luminous and artistically assured as she has ever been.
Yeah. There's obviously no suspense for my answer. Not only do I think she was the runner-up this year, but she would also get my vote as well. I just think it is a miraculous performance. It's everything you said, I totally co-sign. I think she is delicious. I think she is wicked. And I think the final shot of the film is one of the finest endings that I've ever seen. And it's all because of her. And so
it's an all-timer. And it's all on her shoulders. I mean, the camera does not leave her face. It is all her. And I agree. One of the best endings to any film, regardless of decade, genre, one of the all-time great film endings. And it all rests in her face.
Amen. Well, on that note, thank you so much, Barbara. This was such a fun deep dive into this year. You really brought it. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I could easily talk 3 more hours about all of these, but I'm tired and I have allergies. So we won't do that, but thank you so much for having me. This was a delight.
Yes. All right. And tell people where they could find more of you on the internet.
Yeah, so you can find my old bylines at usatoday.com. I've recently got a new gig working for the Sidney Poitier New American Film School at Arizona State University, about which I'm very excited.
Mm.
You can also listen to my podcast, Life of the Mind, a podcast about the Coen brothers, where we are going film by film chronologically through the Coen brothers filmography. And we have just released our episode on Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Mm.
So yeah, come listen.
Very good.
Or you can find me on Twitter. I'm at BabsVan on Twitter, where I'm tweeting about my dad's kitten. So that'll be fun. Come to Twitter for the kitten content.
Yes. Thank you all so much for listening. You can find me at Kevin_Jacobson on all platforms. Podcast is at Oscar Runner Up on Twitter, Instagram, and the Runner Up is. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you liked what you heard and want to hear more, go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup is, where you can hear a whole bunch of bonus episodes. And next week, we will be wrapping up the 80s with a discussion of the Best Actress lineup of 1989, where the nominees were Isabella Gianni and Camille Claudel, Pauline Collins and Shirley Valentine, Jessica Lange in Music Box, Michelle Pfeiffer in The Fabulous Baker Boys, and Jessica Tandy in Driving Miss Daisy, with the winner being Jessica Tandy. So with that, thank you again, Barbara.
Thank you so much.
And I will bid you all adieu.